There is a place beneath you right now that you have never seen and will never see. It exists in complete darkness, under pressures that would silence a steel hull in a single breath, at temperatures that hover just above the threshold where water itself begins to forget what it is. The floor of the deep ocean lies in stillness so absolute that sediment has been accumulating undisturbed for millions of years, building layer upon layer of memory, each grain a record of a world the surface has long since forgotten. If you could fall through that darkness, through those crushing miles of cold salt water, and land gently on that soft and ancient floor, you would find yourself in a place that has not changed in any meaningful way since long before the first human eye opened. But the sea that exists above you now is not the sea that has always been here. That is the thing that most people do not consider when they stand at the edge of the water and watch the waves arrive. The water itself is old, yes, the same water that has been cycling through the atmosphere and the crust since the planet first gathered enough mass to hold an ocean. But the shape of the ocean, the floors of it, the currents within it, the creatures that moved through its sunlit upper layers, all of those things have changed beyond recognition, again and again, across spans of time so enormous that the word ancient begins to feel thin and inadequate. There was a sea, once, that covered the heart of what is now a continent. It was shallow enough in some places that a swimming creature near the surface could look down and see the soft pale floor below, dappled with filtered light. In other places it dropped away into genuine darkness, into depths where cold and pressure pressed equally from every side. It stretched from what would eventually become the Arctic South to where a warm and shallow ocean lapped against the beginning of what would one day be called the Gulf of Mexico. It was alive in ways that the modern ocean can barely approximate. It was teeming. It was loud with the passing of great bodies through warm water. It was ancient even then. That sea no longer exists. Where it once lay, there is now grass and wheat and oil and dust. The creatures that lived in it are compressed into rock, their bones and shells preserved in a darkness of a different kind, the darkness of deep stone rather than deep water. But they were real. They breathed. They fed. They moved through water that caught the light of a sun that was slightly younger than the one that rises over your window now. Tonight, you are going to sink beneath the surface of that sea. You are going to drift down, slowly, through water that is warm and green and full of light near the surface, and gradually darker and stiller as you descend. You are going to spend the night in that vanished world, surrounded by creatures whose names you may know only from museum displays and children's books, but whose lives were as complete and intricate and unhurried as any life that has ever been lived on this planet. There is nothing to fear in that descent. The water is warm. The light is gentle. The creatures that move through it are not concerned with you, you are too small and too slow to draw their attention. You are a witness here, nothing more. A visitor who will drift through the green and the blue and the dark, watching a world go quietly about its ancient business, and then, when morning comes, you will surface again into your own time, rested and calm, carrying with you some faint residue of that other world, that other light, that other deep and patient ocean. Let yourself sink now. The surface is already far above you. The light is already changing, becoming softer and more diffuse, becoming the kind of light that arrives in a room in the late afternoon when the curtains are drawn and the world outside has begun its long and gradual quieting. You are not falling. You are descending, gently, the way snow descends, the way a leaf descends through still air. You have nowhere to be. There is nothing required of you here. Only the slow and generous descent into a world that is older than memory, deeper than sleep, and more full of wonder than you will ever quite find words for. The water is warmer than you expected. That is the first thing you notice, the way it holds heat in a way that the ocean sometimes does in late summer, in a shallow bay, in the middle of a long and generous afternoon. You expected cold. You expected the deep chill of the abyss. But this sea, this particular sea, on this particular afternoon 85 million years before the present moment, is not cold at all. The Western Interior Seaway, that long, narrow, improbable ribbon of ocean that divided the North American continent down its middle for millions of years, is warm, salt-tinged, and lit from above by a sun whose light enters the water in long declining columns and disperses into a green that has no precise modern equivalent. You are not at the surface. You have already sunk below the immediate turbulence of the waves, below the bright white noise of breaking water, into a zone where the motion of the sea translates into something gentler and slower, a long, rolling pulse that lifts and releases you every few seconds, as though the ocean itself is breathing. You are perhaps 20 feet down. Perhaps 30. The light above you is brilliant and shifting, a ceiling of broken glass and silver, and below you the water deepens through shades of green and blue into a darkness that is not threatening but simply distant, the way the far end of a long meadow is distant when you lie in the grass and look toward it. It is the Late Cretaceous Period. The continents are still finding their places, they have not yet arrived at the configurations you would recognize from a globe. North America is divided by water. The Rockies are beginning to rise, tentatively, in the west, pushed upward by the slow grinding of tectonic plates whose patience makes human impatience seem laughable. To the east of this sea, low coastal plains stretch toward what will become the Appalachians, already ancient even now. Above the surface of the water, pterosaurs work the thermals, their wingspans casting shadows on the waves below that look from underwater like the passing of clouds. In the shallow margins of the sea, mosasaurs rest in the shallows with the unhurried patience of creatures who have never had to hurry. But you are in the open water now, in the mid-column of a sea that is full of life from surface to floor, and the first thing you should do, the only thing that is required of you, is to stop. Stop moving. Let the water take you. Let the long slow breath of the ocean move you forward and back in its own rhythm, and simply look. If you enjoy listening to sleepy prehistoric stories like this one, please consider subscribing. I post stories like this every week, and there is always another world waiting for you just below the surface. The first creatures you notice are the smallest ones. There are always more small creatures than large ones, in any ocean, in any era, and this one is no exception. Tiny plankton drift past you in the filtered light, each one smaller than a grain of sand, each one a complete and self-contained life doing its ancient and essential work of converting sunlight into matter that everything larger will eventually depend upon. Among them drift the shells of Foraminifera, single-celled organisms that build themselves elaborate spiral houses of calcium carbonate, houses so intricate and so symmetrical that it is genuinely difficult to accept that they are made by something with no brain, no eyes, no intention. They are falling softly all around you, drifting downward when they die, accumulating on the floor below in a slow and continuous rain of tiny shells that will eventually, given enough millions of years, become limestone. Beyond the plankton, moving through the water with the easy efficiency of creatures that have had hundreds of millions of years to practice, are fish. Not the fish you would recognize from a modern ocean, or not exactly. Some of them would be familiar enough in basic outline, the torpedo shape, the fins, the lateral line running along the flank to sense vibrations in the water. But others are stranger, their bodies flatter or more elongated or armored in ways that evolution has not found useful in the modern ocean and has consequently abandoned. They move in loose groups, not quite schools, shifting direction in mild consensus, their scales catching the light in small and intermittent flashes. Further out, where the water begins to take on its deeper blue, larger shapes are moving. You can see them only in silhouette from here, long, muscular forms that move with a propulsive certainty, their bodies displacing water in a way you can feel as much as see, a gentle pressure wave that arrives before they do and departs after they have passed. These are the animals that will come to define this ocean for you, the ones whose names have drifted out of the deep past and into books and museums and the dreams of children. But there is no urgency in their movement. They are not hunting right now. They are simply moving through the water the way all living things move through the medium of their lives, because the movement itself is what life is. You drift, and the ocean moves around you, and the light above shifts as clouds pass over the surface far above, and the whole world of this vanished sea goes about its business with the calm and unhurried purpose that is the defining characteristic of a world that does not yet know it will ever end. You should know something about this sea before you go any deeper into it, and the thing you should know is this: it should not exist. Not by any logic that the present world would recognize. The North American continent is, in the current era, a continuous landmass from the Canadian Shield in the north to the Gulf of Mexico in the south. There is no internal ocean. There is no point at which the continent divides and the sea comes flooding in to fill the gap. But in the world you are drifting through now, the continent is divided, and has been for millions of years already, and will continue to be for tens of millions of years more. The sea you are floating in is not an anomaly. It is a permanent and essential feature of the world. How does a sea come to exist in the middle of a continent? The answer is the same answer that lies behind most of the large and improbable features of the Earth's surface: the crust is not fixed. It moves, slowly and with tremendous force, driven by the heat of the interior, which has been radiating upward since the planet first coalesced from the spinning disk of debris that surrounded the young sun. In the Cretaceous, the crust of the Pacific plate was subducting, sliding under the western edge of the North American plate, and this process, over millions of years, had two effects. It began building the mountain ranges that would eventually become the Rockies. And it caused the central portion of the continent to sag downward under the weight of accumulated sediment from those rising mountains, creating a low-lying basin that the sea could fill. The sea filled it slowly. First a thin flooding of shallow water across low coastal plains, the advance so gradual that no individual animal living through it would have perceived any change at all. Then, over hundreds of thousands of years, the water deepened as the basin sank further and the sea level rose, and in the Cretaceous, sea level was dramatically higher than it is today, partly because the planet was warmer and the polar ice sheets were smaller, and partly because the spreading sea floors were generating new volcanic rock that displaced ocean water upward. The world was, in those millions of years, a world in which the ratio of ocean to land was tilted strongly toward ocean. Low-lying continental areas that in the modern world are dry were then submerged. The Western Interior Seaway was the largest of these, the most dramatic inundation, the one that divided an entire continent and created an ocean in a place where there would eventually be only prairie. At its maximum extent, and you are drifting through it now, near that maximum, in the late Cretaceous, the seaway stretches approximately 2,000 miles from north to south, and anywhere from 600 to 900 miles from east to west, depending on where along its length you are measuring. In the north, near what will become the Arctic, it is cold and relatively deep. In the south, Where it connects to the warm shallow waters that will eventually become the Gulf of Mexico, it is warmer, richer, more biologically productive. You are somewhere in the middle of that long corridor, and the water around you carries characteristics of both, warm enough to be comfortable, deep enough below the surface that the light has mellowed from the hard brightness of the tropics into something quieter and more sustained. The floor of the seaway in this region lies perhaps 300 feet below where you drift, maybe a little more. 300 feet is not a great depth by the standards of the modern ocean, which reaches nearly 7 miles in its deepest trenches. But 300 feet is enough to create distinct layers in the water column, enough to allow for different communities of creatures at different depths, enough to create a genuine stratification of life from the sunlit surface to the dark and silted floor. You are drifting in what oceanographers would call the photic zone, the layer of water that sunlight can penetrate sufficiently to support photosynthesis. Below the photic zone, the character of the sea changes fundamentally. But up here, in this green and generous light, the world is full and busy and alive. The water has a color that is difficult to name precisely. It is not the deep blue of the open modern Pacific, which gets its color partly from its depth and partly from the relative absence of phytoplankton and other biological material in its surface layers. This sea is shallower and warmer and more productive, and its color reflects that, a green that shades toward turquoise in the shallows near the margins, toward a deeper blue-green in the middle depths where you are drifting, and then toward something darker and more absolute below. The visibility is good today, there has been no recent storm to stir up sediment from the floor, and you can see perhaps 40 or 50 feet in any direction with reasonable clarity before the water begins to haze and then to darken into the indistinct forms of whatever swims or drifts beyond that threshold. The temperature of the water against your skin is approximately 90 degrees Fahrenheit in the surface layers, cooling to perhaps 70 degrees at the depth where you float. By the standards of the modern ocean, this is extraordinarily warm. Most of the world's ocean surface today averages somewhere between 60 and 80 degrees, with the open Pacific and Atlantic considerably cooler than that across most of their area. The Cretaceous world is a greenhouse world, and its oceans reflect that. There are no permanent polar ice caps in this era. The poles are cold by the standards of the tropics, but not frozen. The planet retains its heat more effectively, and that heat concentrates in the surface waters of the ocean, driving a biological productivity that the modern ocean, for all its richness, can barely approximate. It is this warmth that makes the sea so alive. Warm, nutrient-rich water at the surface supports phytoplankton in enormous quantities, tiny photosynthetic organisms that form the base of every marine food chain that has ever existed. Where phytoplankton bloom, zooplankton follow, and where zooplankton concentrate, small fish gather, and where small fish gather, larger fish gather after them, and above all of them the great marine reptiles cruise through the column in long, unhurried arcs, taking what the sea offers them and giving nothing back except the slow rain of their bodies when they eventually die and sink. You are part of this column now. You are in it. The water presses gently against you from all directions, not a threatening pressure, but a presence, the simple fact of matter surrounding you on every side. The sounds of this sea are not the sounds of a modern ocean. There are no boat engines, no sonar pings, no propellers churning the water into froth. The sounds are biological, the clicks and pulses of fish communicating in frequencies too low for human ears to fully resolve, the distant rushing sound of large bodies moving fast through the water somewhere below you, the soft sibilance of plankton-rich water moving against itself as the long Cretaceous swells pass through. It is a sound environment that has no modern equivalent, and sitting within it now, you have the uncanny sensation of having arrived in a world that is so comprehensively itself, so fully realized, so complete in every detail, that your own existence in it feels like a dream that has borrowed the weight and texture of reality. Rest here for a moment, in this warm and ancient water. There is no need to move forward yet. The sea will bring what it brings. The creatures that belong to this world will come to you in their own time, at their own pace, in the order that the ocean has always determined. You only need to be still, and open, and willing to look at what arrives. The light shifts above you as a long Cretaceous cloud drifts over the sun, and the green of the water deepens briefly into something quieter and more interior, and then the cloud passes and the light returns, and the sea around you brightens again with that warm and particular quality of light that has not been seen on this planet for 85 million years and will not be seen again. The water holds you. The current moves you, very gently, in a direction you cannot name. Below you, something large shifts its course and begins to rise from the deeper dark, and you watch it come without alarm, because there is no alarm here, only curiosity, only the patient willingness of a visitor who has arrived in a remarkable place and has nothing to do but witness it. What comes up from below is not threatening. It is a fish, a large one, perhaps 4 feet long, with scales that catch the diffuse light and return it as a cool silver shimmer. It rises in a long diagonal, apparently without purpose, and then levels off perhaps 10 feet below you, and for a moment it is simply hanging there in the water, suspended by the invisible work of its fins, regarding the middle distance with the calm and incurious expression that fish have always worn and will presumably always wear. Then something below draws its attention, a movement, a vibration, a change in the chemistry of the water that its lateral line has detected before its eyes have found the source, and it descends again, smoothly, without hurry, back into the deep green. You watch it go. The sea fills in the space it occupied as though it was never there. And the world goes on, as it has always gone on, as it will go on long after the last of the creatures in this water have been compressed into the rock beneath your feet, long after the sea itself has retreated and the continent has reassembled itself and the grass has grown over the floor of this ocean. But that ending is not now. Now is now. Now is warm water and green light and the long patient breathing of a world that is fully and completely alive. It comes from the direction of the sun, which means that the first thing you see is a shadow on the water above you, a long, tapering shadow that moves with a deliberate and unhurried grace across the shifting silver ceiling of the surface. Then the shadow drops, descends into the column, and resolves itself into a body, and the body is extraordinary. The Mosasaur is perhaps 30 feet long from the tip of its narrow, elongated snout to the end of its long and powerful tail. It moves through the water with a sinuous, full-body undulation that is closer in character to the movement of a serpent on land than to the strokes of a modern shark or dolphin, the whole body participating in each wave of motion, the tail providing the primary thrust but every section of the spine contributing its share to the flowing, continuous rhythm of forward progress. It is a movement that is at once deeply alien and deeply recognizable, a movement that suggests a creature that has found the most elegant possible solution to the problem of moving through water, a solution arrived at through generations of selection so long that the memory of land has been entirely erased. Because that is what the mosasaurs are, they are the memory of land. Not so long ago, in geological terms, their ancestors were lizards. Large lizards, already formidable, already predatory, already adapted in a dozen ways for hunting. But the shallow coastal seas of the Cretaceous offered resources that no land environment could match, an abundance of food that had never been hunted from the water, coastlines where competitors were few and the sea provided refuge. And so, over millions of years that are nevertheless a geological eyeblink compared to the age of the sea itself, the ancestors of this animal gave up the land and entered the water, and the sea shaped them into what you see now. The one approaching you is not the largest mosasaur in this sea. There are animals in the deeper sections of this same water that would make this creature seem modest by comparison, Tylosaurus, which can reach 40 feet and more, and Mosasaurus itself, which will eventually lend its name to the entire group and which cruises the deepest parts of this corridor with an authority that nothing else in the water can challenge. But this animal, which belongs to one of the medium-sized genera, perhaps Platycarpus, perhaps Cleidasts, the light is not clear enough for certainty, is still an imposing and beautiful thing, and it is coming toward you with the calm and measured pace of an animal that is not yet hunting. It is not hunting because it has already eaten. You can tell this, somehow, from the quality of its movement. There is a slight heaviness to it, a contentment in the way it moves, as though the urgency that drives a hungry animal has been temporarily quieted and what remains is pure locomotion for its own sake, the pleasure of moving through warm water in the afternoon of a good day. The mosasaur is warm-blooded, or something approaching warm-blooded, at least, in the sense that it has a metabolism that keeps it active and alert in water that would slow a cold-blooded animal, and this metabolism requires frequent feeding. But right now, it has fed, and it is traveling, moving along the surface of its territory in a long patrol that serves both to map the location of available prey and to announce its presence to other mosasaurs who might be inclined to dispute the boundaries. It passes perhaps 20 feet from where you drift, and in the moment of its passing you can see it in something close to full detail. The body is dark above, a deep charcoal green, almost black in certain angles of the light, and lighter below, a pale cream or off-white that catches the diffuse upwelling light from the sea floor and breaks up the silhouette for anything looking up from below. This counter-shading is not a coincidence. It is the same solution that sharks and tuna and whales have arrived at independently, the same solution that the biology of swimming predators keeps discovering because it works, dark above so the sky provides no contrast for prey looking down from above, pale below so the sea floor light provides no contrast for prey looking up from below. The mosasaur has been shaped by the same pressures that shape every hunter in the open water column, and the solution it wears on its skin is one of the oldest and most reliable solutions in the history of marine predation. The head is long and narrow, with jaws that are hinged in a way that allows them to open very wide, not the dislocating gape of a snake, but a genuine expansion, the lower jaw spreading slightly as the upper jaw lifts, creating an aperture much larger than the closed profile would suggest. The teeth are conical and numerous, set in both the jaws and on the roof of the mouth on what is called the pterygoid bone, extra teeth that help to grip slippery fish and prevent their escape once caught. The eyes are large and forward-facing enough to give reasonable binocular vision, which is unusual in animals this large and suggests a commitment to precision hunting rather than simple ambush. Along its flanks, barely visible at this distance but present if you look closely, the lateral line organ runs in a narrow dark stripe, sensing pressure waves and electrical fields and the 1,000 invisible signals that the water constantly carries. The tail moves in that long, easy sinusoid and the animal recedes from you, growing smaller as it moves into the middle distance of the hazy green water, and then it turns, a long, banking turn, the whole body leaning into it the way an aircraft banks, and it is gone, dissolved back into the green from which it came. You hang in the water for a while after it has gone, thinking about what you have seen. It is difficult to maintain any sense of alarm about the mosasaur, even knowing what you know about its capabilities and its habits. There is nothing in the way it moves or the way it regarded you, if it regarded you at all, that suggests aggression or interest. It is simply a large animal moving through its environment, and you are a very small and stationary object that does not register as food, as threat, or as anything requiring acknowledgement. The Mosasaur's world is full of large things, schools of fish that number in the millions, squid that aggregate in the shallows by the tens of thousands, other mosasaurs whose territories it must navigate. You, floating motionless in the water column, are simply part of the background of a world that has never needed to make accommodations for your species. This sense of irrelevance is, in its own way, deeply peaceful. There is a particular kind of rest that comes from being in a place where no one needs anything from you, where your presence exerts no particular force on the world around you, where you can be simply and entirely a witness. That is the gift of this ancient sea, its complete indifference to you, its total absorption in its own ancient business, its utter lack of any need or expectation that you participate in anything at all. The water continues to move around you in its long, slow pulse. Above you the light shifts and dances. Somewhere in the middle distance, a school of fish turns simultaneously, each individual responding to the same pressure wave, and the school flashes silver for a moment like a mirror held at an angle, and then darkens again as it turns away from the light. The afternoon is long. The sea is warm. There is nowhere to be and nothing to do except drift, and look, and breathe, and let the old world move through you like water through a net, capturing something of its texture and its temperature and its quality of light, but letting the substance of it pass through, letting the ancient water keep its ancient secrets, letting the Cretaceous afternoon continue in its unhurried way toward an evening that is still many millions of years from being the last evening this sea will ever see. You close your eyes for a moment. The water supports you. The pulse of it is as regular as breathing. When you open them again, the sea is exactly as you left it, patient, warm, full of creatures going about their lives with the quiet efficiency of things that have been doing this for a very long time and expect to continue doing it for a very long time to come. Rest is available here. The kind of rest that comes from being held by something larger than yourself, something that does not ask you to understand it completely, only to accept that it is what it is, water, and light, and time, and the passing of great and beautiful creatures through a world that was already old when the first flower bloomed. If you are already drifting, already sinking into the warm quiet of this ancient sea, let yourself go. Subscribe so that the next story is waiting for you when you return. Sleep well. You have been drifting for a while now, long enough that the initial strangeness of this world has begun to settle into something more like familiarity, the way a new room becomes familiar after you have slept in it once and woken up to find its proportions and qualities of light exactly as you left them. The sea is consistent in its rhythms. The light comes from above and diminishes below. The creatures move according to appetites and territories that have nothing to do with you. And gradually, as the novelty of the great reptiles fades into the background, you begin to notice the smaller kingdoms. They are everywhere. They have been everywhere since before you started paying attention to them, but the eye naturally seeks the large and the dramatic before it settles to the small and the intricate, and so it is only now, with the Mosasaur's wake still visible as a faint turbulence in the water behind you, that you begin to see the Ammonites. An Ammonite is a cephalopod, a member of the same great family that includes squids and octopuses and nautiluses, creatures whose bodies are organized around a powerful head mounted with eyes and tentacles, a jet propulsion system for rapid movement through the water, and a sophisticated nervous system that makes them, by invertebrate standards, remarkably intelligent. The nautilus is the Ammonite's closest living relative, though the two are not the same thing, and looking at a nautilus today gives you some sense of what an Ammonite was, while misleading you in important ways as well. The shell of a nautilus is coiled in a tight planus spiral, a flat, symmetrical spiral that expands outward from a central point, each new chamber slightly larger than the one before, the living animal always occupying the outermost and largest chamber while the smaller chambers behind it are filled with gas and fluid in a ratio that can be adjusted to control buoyancy. The Ammonites used the same basic architecture, but they elaborated it in thousands of ways across the millions of years of their existence, experimenting with suture patterns so complex that they look like frost on a window, with spine and knob and ridge ornamentation that served purposes we can only guess at, with coiling geometries that departed from the standard spiral into helices and hooks and near straight lines, as though the engineering problem of the shell had been handed to 1,000 different designers and each had solved it differently. The ones you see now, drifting in clusters at various depths around you, are mostly the elegant coiled type, smooth and symmetrical, their shells ranging from a few inches across to nearly 2 feet in diameter in the largest individuals. Their color, in life, is something the fossil record cannot tell you with certainty. It preserves the mineral composition of the shell but not the pigments that once decorated it, which were organic compounds that break down in the millions of years between burial and excavation. But the living shell around you now carries colors, bands of russet and cream and faint gold that run in smooth arcs along the whorls of the outer surface, with iridescent inner layers where the nacre catches the light and returns it in shifting greens and blues and purples. They move, but slowly, pumping water from their funnel in the small, pulsed jets that are the cephalopod means of locomotion, each jet moving them a few inches in the opposite direction, each pulse followed by a moment of gliding. They are not built for speed, they are built for economy and endurance, for the kind of existence that involves drifting with the current through rich feeding grounds and eating the small crustaceans and fish eggs and plankton that come within range of their tentacles. The tentacles themselves are shorter and more numerous than those of a modern squid, perhaps a dozen of them, each equipped with small suckers, arranged in a ring around the mouth at the center of the coiled shell. They taste the water as they drift, extracting chemical information about what has been here before them and what lies ahead. You find yourself watching one individual in particular, a large one, perhaps 18 inches across, whose shell is more elaborately ribbed than most of the others, with a regular pattern of low ridges running across each whorl that might serve as camouflage or might be a mechanism for strengthening the shell against pressure or might simply be the expression of a particular genetic line. It drifts perhaps 6 feet from you, slowly descending, its tentacles trailing gently upward as it sinks, its mantle pumping in the slow rhythmic fashion of a creature in no particular hurry. Occasionally one of the tentacles reaches out to touch something in the water and then withdraws again, exploring, or tasting, or both. There is something hypnotic about the Ammonites' movement. The combination of the slow, deliberate drift, the regular pulsing of the mantle, and the perfect geometry of the shell creates a visual rhythm that is profoundly calming to witness. It is the rhythm of something that has found its place in the world completely, that has been doing exactly this for millions of years and has no uncertainty about whether what it is doing is correct or adequate. The Ammonite does not wonder whether it is living its life well. It lives its life. The shell it carries is precisely the shell it needs. The water it drifts through is precisely the water it requires. The food it will find tonight is already there, ahead of it in the current, waiting with the passivity of things that are destined to be eaten. You are surrounded by them now, as the current has brought you into a concentration of ammonites that has gathered where upwelling water brings cold, nutrient-rich water from below to mix with the warmer surface layers. In this mixing zone, phytoplankton blooms in densities that cloud the water with a faint green haze, and the zooplankton that feed on the phytoplankton are present in numbers that attract everything that eats zooplankton, and the Ammonites are among those things. The aggregation is loose and drifting, not the tight, coordinated school of fish, but a gentle congregation of individuals who have independently been drawn to the same good feeding ground. In the mix, you begin to notice how various they are. Not all of them are the same tidy spiral. Some have shells that are unwound, partially uncoiled, so that the final whirl does not follow the curve of the ones before but continues outward in a more or less straight line before curving upward at the tip into a hook. These are the heteromorphs, and they are abundant in the late Cretaceous, as though the Ammonite lineage, in its final millions of years, decided to run every possible geometric experiment simultaneously. The straight-line ones are called Baculites, and they are among the most common Ammonites in this sea, long, slender creatures with a small coiled apex at one end and a long tapering shell that trails behind them as they rise and fall through the water column in slow daily migrations, chasing the zooplankton that concentrate at different depths at different times of day. A baculite drifts past you at close range, and you can see it clearly, perhaps 3 feet long, its shell worn smooth by the water, its tentacles working steadily at the small crustaceans and copepods that abound in this feeding zone. Its eye, large for the size of its body, set in the soft tissue at the front of the shell, catches the light for a moment, and in that moment you have the uncanny impression of being regarded. The cephalopod eye is remarkable. It is the product of a completely independent evolution from the vertebrate eye, arrived at through a different series of mutations and selections, built from different materials by different molecular processes, and yet it arrives at very nearly the same functional design, a lens, a retina, a pupil that adjusts to light. It sees you, probably, though what it makes of what it sees you cannot know. The baculite continues on its slow vertical migration, descending into the green haze below, and you watch it until it disappears, and then you watch the space where it was, and the space fills with the movement of other creatures, other Ammonites, the endless gentle tumbling of this world going about its business. The Ammonites have been here since before the dinosaurs walked on land. They have watched, if watching is the right word for the passive accumulation of existence in a world that is older than attention, the evolution of the fish, the rise of the marine reptiles, the gradual transformation of the ocean from one configuration to another across hundreds of millions of years of change. They will continue to watch until the very end, because the end of the Ammonites comes not from any failing in themselves but from the same catastrophe that ends everything else, the asteroid, the darkness, the collapse of the food chains that sustain the phytoplankton bloom on which all of this ultimately depends. But that end is not tonight. Tonight there are Ammonites in the warm water of this Cretaceous sea, and they drift in their hundreds and their thousands through the green light, and they are exactly what they have always been, which is one of the most successful and beautiful and varied designs that life on this planet has ever produced. You drift among them for a while longer, feeling the current carry you slowly through the aggregation, feeling the temperature of the water on your skin and the mild pulsing of the sea's long breathing around you. The light is beginning to change above, the afternoon is moving toward its later stages, and the angle of the sun through the surface water is shifting, stretching the shafts of light into longer, more golden angles. The Ammonites are still all around you, and their presence is a comfort of a particular kind, the comfort of being in the company of something that is simply and completely itself, that asks nothing and offers its beauty without reservation to anyone willing to stop moving long enough to see it. The current has shifted, as currents in this sea often do in the afternoon, and you have been carried gradually southward and somewhat deeper, not far, not into the dark zone below the photic layer, but into the quieter middle depths where the light is softer and the water cooler and the traffic of the surface seems distant and muffled. Down here, in this quieter layer, you find the plesiosaurs. A plesiosaur is not a mosasaur, and it is not a dinosaur, and it is not anything that has a very close living relative in the modern world. It is its own thing, a lineage that branched off from the reptile family tree in the Triassic period, before the dinosaurs were established, before the mosasaurs had begun their transition from land to water, before this sea itself had come into existence. By the time you float here now, the plesiosaurs have been in the water for 100 million years, and they have diverged into two main body plans so different from each other that it is slightly surprising they share the same name. The first body plan is the plesiosaur in the classic sense, a small, compact body, for wide flippers modified from what were once legs, and a very long neck, in some species, extraordinarily long, topped by a relatively small head. These long-necked forms have haunted the human imagination ever since their fossils were first described, because the proportions seem impossible, seem like something designed by a committee working from contradictory instructions. The neck of some species makes up more than half the total body length. The vertebrae in the neck are sometimes more than 70 in number. The head is barely adequate for the body it serves, with small, peg-like teeth suitable for catching slippery fish but not for tearing prey or crushing shells. The second body plan inverts the proportions, a very large head on a relatively short neck, set on a robust and powerful body. These are the pliosaurs, though the distinction between plesiosaurs and pliosaurs is informal rather than strictly taxonomic, and they include some of the largest marine predators that have ever lived, animals like Crinosaurus and Liopleurodon, which reached lengths of 30 to 40 feet and possessed jaws that could close with a force that no modern predator can match. The ones you see here, in this quieter layer of the water, are not the giant pliosaurs. Those animals tend to cruise the deeper and more productive areas of the sea, where the food supply can sustain their enormous metabolic requirements. These are the smaller, long-necked forms, elasmosaurids, most likely, given the proportions you can see as they move through the water ahead of you. They are perhaps 15 feet long overall, of which perhaps 8 feet is neck, and they move through the water in a way that is utterly unlike anything else in this sea. Where the mosasaur undulates its whole body in flowing waves, the plesiosaur flies. That is the word that comes to mind when you watch how it moves. The four flippers, each one modified from the ancient reptilian limb into a broad, flexible paddle, stroke through the water in a motion that is far more similar to the wing beat of a bird than to the tail stroke of a fish. Each flipper moves in a figure-8 pattern, pulling water behind it on the power stroke and feathering through the recovery stroke, and the four of them together generate a complex, three-dimensional flow that propels the animal with surprising grace through the water. The body itself, by contrast, is relatively still. The neck moves, tilting and adjusting, the small head questing through the water with quick, bird-like turns. But the main body is held as steady as a hull, the four flippers doing all the work. You watch one individual, a female, you think, though the sex of a plesiosaur is not easy to determine from external features, as she works her way through a loose aggregation of fish that has gathered in the slightly cooler water of this middle depth. Her approach is not the straightforward rush of a predator in open pursuit. Instead she moves alongside the fish school, keeping herself at a slight angle so that her long neck can reach into the school while her body passes along its edge. The fish are aware of her, they shift away from her neck when it enters their space, the school's edge rippling outward in the characteristic wave of a group responding to a perceived threat, but they do not scatter in panic, and she seems to know this, seems to understand that slow and patient is more effective than fast and direct when hunting animals that can scatter in any direction simultaneously. She takes a fish with a snap of her small, toothed jaws, a clean catch, the fish disappearing into her mouth in a single motion, and then drifts for a moment with her neck extended and her head slightly raised, swallowing. The school closes up around the gap she has made, the individual fish reasserting their positions within the group with a few quick fin beats, as though the absence of one of their number is an empty space in a pattern that must be filled. There is another plesiosaur visible at the edge of your vision, deeper and farther away, its long neck visible as a pale elongated form moving slowly through the haze of the deeper water. And beyond that, barely discernible, what might be a third. They are not schooling animals, they do not have the tight social bonds of the fish they hunt, but they tolerate each other's presence in good feeding areas, and there is something almost companionable in the way they move through the same water without acknowledgement, each one focused on its own hunting but aware of the others in the peripheral fashion of creatures who have been sharing the same productive hunting grounds for a very long time. The plesiosaur near you has moved deeper now, following the fish school as it descends slightly in response to some cue you cannot detect, perhaps a change in water temperature, perhaps a shift in the direction of the current carrying the plankton on which the fish feed. You watch her go, the long neck trailing upward slightly as she descends, the four flippers working in their steady, almost mechanical rhythm. She is beautiful in the way that all animals that have found their perfect form are beautiful, not decorative, but right, in the sense that every element of her body is doing exactly what it needs to do and nothing more. You have read, or perhaps you remember reading, that plesiosaurs came ashore to lay eggs in the way that modern sea turtles do, hauling themselves up beaches in the darkness and depositing clutches in the warm sand above the tide line. There is some evidence for this in the fossil record, though it is incomplete, and more recent discoveries have suggested that some plesiosaur species may have given birth to live young in the water, as modern dolphins and whales do. The question is not settled. In this sea, tonight, the answer is being lived out by every female plesiosaur who carries young or who will soon seek a beach, but the answer is not available to you, here in the water column, watching from a respectful distance. What is available to you is this: the sight of an animal that has existed in one form or another for 100 million years, that has found a way to live in this ocean that works so well it has not needed to change significantly in all that time, that moves through the water with a confidence that is not the confidence of aggression but simply the confidence of belonging, of having been made for exactly this medium and no other. The afternoon light continues its slow rotation above you, the shafts coming at longer angles now, the green of the water taking on a slightly warmer cast as the sun moves toward the west. Around you, the life of the sea continues its endless, patient cycles, the plankton blooming and dying, the small things eating the smaller things, the larger things eating the small things, and all of it held within the long, warm embrace of this sea that will not always be here but for now is so entirely here that it seems impossible it could ever be otherwise. You drift in this quieter layer of the water, and the plesiosaur's passage disturbs the water very gently, and the disturbance reaches you as a mild and pleasant pressure against your skin, as though the sea is reminding you that you are in it, that it is holding you, that the ancient and generous water is on every side and below you and above you, and all you need to do is let it. There comes a point, drifting in this ancient water, when you find yourself curious about what lies below you, not just the hazy blue darkness of the mid-water column, but the actual floor of this sea, the surface on which everything in this ocean ultimately rests. And so you begin, very gently, to descend. Not falling, not rushing. Simply allowing the slight negative buoyancy of a body that is not fighting against gravity to carry you downward, degree by degree, through water that grows incrementally cooler and darker as the surface recedes above you. The transition is gradual and beautiful. At the depth where you have been drifting, 20, 30 feet, the light is full and generous, the color of the water a rich saturated green. As you descend through 50 feet, the quality of the light changes, it loses some of its warmth, becomes bluer, more diffuse, the individual shafts of sunlight from above softening into a general luminescence that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. At 80 feet, you are in a world where colors begin to disappear in sequence, because colors are nothing more than the response of the eye to specific wavelengths of light, and different wavelengths are absorbed by water at different rates. Red disappears first, already gone by the time you reach 40 feet. Orange follows. Yellow. Green persists longer than any of these, which is why the middle depths have always had that particular blue-green cast. And then, as you sink through 100 feet, even the green begins to thin, and what remains is blue, a deep and clear and clean blue that exists nowhere on the surface of the land. At perhaps 150 feet, the floor is visible below you. It is not dramatic. It is a soft expanse of pale gray-brown sediment, chalky, silty, composed of the accumulated shells of countless billions of Foraminifera and Coccolithophores and other calcareous plankton who have been falling like slow, gentle snow from the sunlit surface waters above for millions of years. The chalk layer is thick here. It will eventually, after the sea retreats and the land rises and millions of years of pressure and heat transform it, become the limestone and chalk formations that underlie much of the central United States, will become the rock that farmers break their plows on, the stone that wells are drilled through, the geological record that geologists will read for evidence of this sea's existence. But right now, it is soft. It is nearly a liquid in its upper layers, where the microscopic shells have not yet had time to consolidate into anything harder than a loose, waterlogged paste. Your feet, if you were to land on it, which you will not, would sink into the ankle, maybe deeper, disturbing a century's worth of accumulated sediment with a single step. The animals that live here have learned to deal with this softness in various ways. Some have broad, flat feet that act as snowshoes, distributing their weight across a large area of the soft substrate. Some live permanently buried within it, their bodies adapted to the lack of solid purchase. Some hover just above it, never quite settling, spending their lives in the few inches of water between the soft floor and the dark water column above. You drift above the floor at perhaps 10 feet, close enough to see it in some detail, far enough that your movement does not disturb it significantly. The first thing you notice is how much life is here. You might have expected the deep floor to be empty or sparse, a featureless desert of pale sediment extending to the horizon. Instead it is populated, in the quiet and particular way of deep benthic communities, with a diversity of forms that is almost overwhelming once you begin to see it. Crinoids extend their feathery arms above the sediment surface, each arm bearing hundreds of smaller pinnules designed to catch the fine organic particles that rain continuously from above. They are not animals in any way that looks familiar, they look more like flowers, or perhaps like the underwater equivalent of a tree, each individual rooted by its holdfast to a small piece of harder substrate embedded in the soft chalk. But they are animals. The feathery arms can move, withdrawing slowly when disturbed, and the central disc that bears the arms contains a rudimentary nervous system and a digestive system and all the other apparatus of a living organism doing its essential work of converting dead organic material into living tissue. Among and between the crinoids move the smaller creatures of the floor, brittle stars, their 5 slender arms covered in small spines, moving across the sediment surface with a surprisingly swift and fluid motion. Sea cucumbers, long and leathery, moving even more slowly than the brittle stars, their mouths continuously working at the sediment, swallowing it and extracting the organic material before expelling the depleted mineral remainder, small crustaceans that scuttle through the gaps. Between crinoids and brittle stars with the frantic efficiency of animals that are simultaneously searching for food and avoiding being food themselves. There are bivalves here, too, clams, in the broadest sense, though many of them are species that no longer exist. Some of them are bizarre in their proportions, outsized in ways that suggest specific adaptations to the conditions of this sea and this sediment. One group, the rudists, has completely abandoned the symmetrical bivalve body plan and grown into shapes that look more like coral, one valve becoming a large, vase-like cup attached to the substrate, the other valve modified into a small lid. They are colonial in some species, growing in dense reef-like masses that provide structure and hard substrate in an environment that is otherwise uniformly soft. You notice, as your eyes adjust to the dim light of this depth, that the floor is not entirely flat. There are small mounds and depressions, low ridges and shallow channels, the subtle topography of a soft-bottomed sea shaped by the slow movement of bottom currents that arrive here much reduced in energy from their surface origins but still carrying enough force to sculpt the sediment over time. In some of the depressions, organic material has accumulated in slightly greater concentrations, patches of darker sediment that represent small oases of richness in the otherwise uniform pale floor. A fish comes to rest on the bottom just ahead of you, a flatfish or something very like one, its body laterally compressed until it is almost two-dimensional, its two eyes migrated to the same side of its head in the particular developmental modification that allows a flatfish to lie on its side on the bottom and still see what is above it. It settles onto the pale sediment and almost immediately becomes invisible, its coloration shifting slightly to match the background in a camouflage that is one of the oldest and most effective adaptations in the history of the ocean floor. You watch the place where it settled and after a few seconds you genuinely cannot see it, even knowing it is there. This is the primary mode of life on the floor, waiting. Everything that lives here has in some sense arranged its life around the art of waiting, waiting for food to fall from above, waiting for prey to come within reach, waiting for the current to shift and bring new material, waiting in the way that only things without appointments and without anxiety can wait, which is to say not waiting at all but simply being, in a state of open readiness that has no impatience in it. The floor of this sea has been here, in one form or another, for millions of years. It has accumulated its sediment layer by layer, each layer a record of what was living in the water above it when that layer was deposited. If you could read it, the way a geologist reads it, you would find in its compressed strata a complete and detailed history of this sea from its earliest flooding to its eventual retreat. You would find the records of warm periods and cooler periods, of mass extinctions and explosive radiations, of species that appeared and species that vanished. You would find, if you read it with the right instruments, the chemical signature of the asteroid impact that will end all of this, a thin, dark line of iridium and shocked quartz that will one day be found in limestone quarries and road cuts and riverbanks all over the world, the calling card of the end of the Mesozoic Era. But that layer has not yet been deposited. The floor below you is still building its record, layer by patient layer, in a process so gradual that the concept of speed has no meaning here. The crinoids wave their arms in the gentle bottom current. The brittle stars move across the soft chalk with their quick, flowing motion. The flatfish lies invisible on the surface, waiting. And above it all, above the floor and the slow animals of the deep and the blue-green water and the light that diminishes so gradually from surface to bottom, the sea continues to be exactly and completely what it is, warm, alive, ancient, and in no hurry at all. You ascend slowly from the floor, rising back through the increasing warmth and light of the shallower water, and as you rise the blue deepens back to green and the world opens again around you, and the creatures of the middle depths return to your awareness, the fish, the distant forms of the great reptiles, the gentle drift of Ammonites in the current. You carry with you the memory of the floor, the memory of that soft pale world down there, that patient community of waiting things, and it stays with you as a kind of anchor, a reminder that beneath all the drama and movement of the open water column there is this other world, this slow and accepting world, this floor that has been here long before any of these creatures and will be here long after them. The light is changing now. There is no question of it. The particular quality of the illumination in the water has shifted from the bright and generous light of full afternoon towards something quieter, warmer, more amber in its cast. The sun is moving toward the western horizon, which means it is moving toward the mountains, the proto-Rockies that are still low and tentative compared to what they will eventually become but are already high enough to catch the light and hold it for a little while in the evening, sending it sideways across the water in long golden shafts that penetrate the sea at a low angle and fill the upper 20 feet of the water column with something that is less like light and more like warmth made visible. The animals of this sea respond to the changing light in ways that reflect millions of years of evolution in an environment where light is the primary timekeeper, where the difference between day and night determines who is hunting and who is hiding and who is moving and who is resting. The shift you are witnessing now, from full day toward evening, triggers adjustments throughout the water column, some of which are dramatic and some of which are so subtle that you would miss them if you were not watching carefully. The fish schools that have been visible throughout the afternoon begin to change their behavior. During the middle of the day, many of them have been holding in loose, relaxed formations, feeding opportunistically on the plankton-rich water without particular urgency. Now they tighten. The individual fish move closer together, the spaces between them narrowing from inches to fractions of an inch, the school becoming more cohesive, more unified, a single pulsing entity rather than a collection of individuals. This tightening is a response to the changing light. Reduced visibility at the margins of the day is when predators become more effective at ambush, and the fish's best defense against a predator that attacks from outside the school is to make the school denser, to reduce the likelihood that any individual at the school's edge can be singled out and separated. The mosasaurs, for their part, become more active in the evening. You can see one in the middle distance, perhaps a different individual from the one you saw earlier, or perhaps the same one completing another circuit of its territory, moving with a slightly increased energy that suggests the shift in predatory opportunity has registered in its nervous system. It is not yet hunting with focused intent, but it is more alert, its movements subtly more purposeful, its head turning more frequently to scan the water ahead. By full dark, it will be among the most active hunters in this sea, using the darkness not as an obstacle but as an advantage, its large and sensitive eyes adapted for low-light hunting in a way that most of its prey cannot match. You ascend to the surface as the evening comes, breaking through the interface between water and air for the first time since you began your descent this morning, and the world above the water is extraordinary in the evening light. The surface of the sea stretches in every direction to horizons that are flat and absolute. No land is visible from here, no mountains, no shore. Just water, and sky, and the beginning of the evening color spreading from the west where the sun is descending toward the line of the horizon. The color of the sky in this Cretaceous evening is not precisely the color of a modern sky. The atmosphere of the Cretaceous world has a slightly higher carbon dioxide concentration than the modern atmosphere, not dramatically higher, but enough to affect the scattering of light in subtle ways, enough to give the sky a quality that you might notice if you were looking for it, a slightly deeper blue at the zenith, a slightly richer gold in the western glow of the descending sun. The clouds, and there are clouds, high cirrus that catches the last horizontal light and glows in pale bands of pink and orange, are arranged in patterns that are not quite any pattern you have seen before, because the prevailing winds in this sea are not the prevailing winds of the modern continent, and the weather systems that form here follow paths that have no modern equivalent. Above the water, the pterosaurs are working. They were working all day, of course. They have been working every day of their lives, because the kind of flight that pterosaurs practice requires a constant investment of energy that leaves little room for extended rest during daylight hours. But in the evening they seem more concentrated over the sea surface, drawn by the same upwelling of small fish toward the surface that the evening activity patterns of the sea create. You watch several of them, the large ones, the ones with wingspans that exceed 20 feet, riding the thermals above the warmest sections of the sea surface, circling in long, slow spirals that conserve energy while maintaining altitude. When one of them spots a concentration of fish at the surface, it folds its wings slightly and descends in a long diagonal glide, hitting the water at an angle and coming up with a fish or missing entirely and pulling back up for another pass. The misses seem as frequent as the catches, which is always the truth about predation. It is hard work, even for the most elegantly designed hunter. You float at the surface on your back, looking up at the sky, feeling the warm water rock you gently in the long evening swells. The water makes a sound here at the surface that it does not make below, a complex combination of the lapping of small waves against your body and the deeper, more resonant sound of large swells passing underneath, a sound you can feel as much as hear, a low vibration that seems to travel through the water and through you simultaneously. It is the sound of a very large body of water moving in its natural rhythms, a sound that no machine has ever replicated and that the human body recognizes at a level deeper than conscious thought as something safe, something trustworthy, something that was the sound backdrop of the first environment in which our ancestors lived. The evening is warm. In the Cretaceous world, even at this latitude, the cold of night is modest. The greenhouse atmosphere retains enough heat that the temperature differential between day and night is gentler than it is in the modern world, and the sea, which stores heat efficiently in its upper layers, radiates warmth well into the night. You are comfortable. The water around you is the temperature of a warm bath, though with the salt and the slight resistance of the waves rather than the still water of a bathtub. You are not tired in the way that physical exertion produces tiredness, but you are tired in the way that full attention produces tiredness. You have been looking and listening and noticing since you arrived in this sea, and the accumulation of so much noticing has a pleasant weight to it, a comfortable fullness, like a day spent in a place so beautiful that your senses have been receiving without cease since morning. The sky continues to color and then to fade, the pink deepening briefly to scarlet in the high clouds before mellowing to lavender and then to the first deep blue that precedes full dark. Stars begin to appear, one by one at first, the brightest ones, and they are the same stars you know, the same patterns, because 85 million years is not long enough for stellar drift to noticeably rearrange the constellations. The light from those stars left them before the Cretaceous ended, before the asteroid arrived, before the great dying and the slow rebuilding that followed. The light you would see if you looked up at them tonight has been traveling through space for all of that time, and it arrives here no older and no younger than the moment it was emitted. A mosasaur surfaces nearby, close enough that you can hear it breathe, a long, forceful exhalation followed by an inhalation, the breath of a large lung-breathing animal that has been underwater for some minutes and needs to renew its air supply before diving again. The surfacing is unhurried and confident, the large head lifting clear of the water and the nostril openings at the top of the skull flaring briefly before the animal submerges again in a long, smooth dive. It barely displaces the water as it goes. The ripples from its passing reach you a few seconds later, lifting you gently and then letting you settle back. You are rocked in the warm water of the Cretaceous evening, under a sky that is filling with stars that have been burning since before the earth existed, on the surface of a sea that is itself, in its current form, only a few million years old, which is to say, very young by the standards of the planet, but very old by any standard you have personally encountered. The water is warm. The sky is darkening toward full night. The animals around you are settling into their nocturnal patterns, some becoming more active and some becoming less, the whole ecology of the sea making its daily adjustment from the diurnal to the nocturnal. You are perfectly safe. You are perfectly held. The water is warm and the night is coming on in a world that has never heard a human voice and does not know that it will one day be dry, and in that not knowing there is a kind of innocence, not the innocence of ignorance, which is merely the absence of knowledge, but the innocence of completeness, of a world that is exactly what it needs to be, doing exactly what it needs to do, in exactly the time that has been given to it. The stars multiply above you. The sea breathes beneath you. And the day, which has held so much, settles gently into the first darkness of the Cretaceous night. The night ocean is not dark in the way that rooms are dark, or caves, or the space behind closed eyes. It is dark in its own way, a darkness that has depth and texture and movement, that is not the absence of everything but the presence of a different quality of everything, a world that has reorganized itself around different rules and different possibilities than the one that exists in daylight. You have descended below the surface again, back into the water, because the water at night has a quality that is not available to you on the surface. Bioluminescence. The word comes from the Latin for living light, and that is exactly what it is, light produced by living organisms, not captured from the sun but generated from within, through chemical reactions that have been refined by evolution into one of the most efficient light-producing processes in the history of chemistry. In the modern ocean, bioluminescence is common and spectacular. In the Cretaceous ocean, it is no less so, and in the warm and biologically productive waters of the Western Interior Seaway, it fills the night water with light of a particular blue-green that has no exact modern equivalent in tone or intensity. The first lights you see are the smallest ones, single-celled dinoflagellates, each no larger than a grain of fine sand, each one capable of producing a brief flash of blue-green light when disturbed by the movement of water. They are present in enormous concentrations in the surface layers of this sea, and as the swells of the Cretaceous night move through the water, each passing wave compresses and agitates millions of them simultaneously, and the result is a traveling wave of blue-green light that mirrors the wave structure exactly, the crests lit, the troughs dark, and the whole moving train of luminescence advancing across the water surface in a procession that is one of the most beautiful things that has ever existed on this planet. Below the surface, the effect is different. You are surrounded by a faint, diffuse glow that seems to have no source, or rather, the source is everywhere, distributed through the water itself, concentrated in every direction you look. When you move your hand through the water, the motion compresses the dinoflagellates and a trail of blue-green light follows your fingers, dissipating in a second or two as the organisms recover and the light fades. You could write your name in the water and watch the letters dissolve. Among the dinoflagellates, larger bioluminescent organisms contribute their own light. Jellyfish pulse through the water with the slow, hypnotic rhythm that is the most peaceful movement in the ocean, a steady contraction and relaxation, the bell pulling in and then spreading wide, each cycle moving the animal a few inches upward before it sinks back to its original position and contracts again. The jellyfish of this era are not significantly different from those of the modern ocean, because the jellyfish body plan reached a kind of perfection very early in the history of animal life and has not needed to change much since. These are ancient animals in the deepest sense, Their ancestors were swimming through the Cambrian seas 500 million years ago, and the individual in front of you now is not meaningfully different from those Cambrian originals. The bioluminescent jellyfish trails light from its trailing tentacles, long, thin threads of pale blue that stream behind it as it pulses upward, hanging in the water for several seconds after the jellyfish itself has moved on, creating a slowly dissolving calligraphy in the dark water. You could follow a jellyfish here by its trail alone, reading its passage through the water the way you might read footprints in sand, except that the footprints glow and the glowing is beautiful and the sand is water and the water is 85 million years from being recovered from the sea floor that it will one day become. The squid come out at night. During the day, they were in the deeper water, below the photic zone, resting or hunting the things that live in the dark below the light. But at night they ascend, drawn by the concentration of small prey in the surface layers, and also perhaps by something that is harder to name, some sense that the night is their element, that the darkness is a medium in which their particular combination of speed and intelligence and jet propulsion is most effective. They are not the giant squid of the modern deep ocean, which can exceed 50 feet in length and which live so deep that only dead individuals or brief glimpses from submersibles have ever been seen by human eyes. These are smaller, 2 to 3 feet of mantle, perhaps 4 or 5 feet total including the tentacles, but they are fast, spectacularly fast, their propulsion system capable of accelerating them from rest to full speed in a fraction of a second. You watch one hunt. It has found a dense patch of small fish, and it is working the edge of the patch with a patience that contradicts the violence it is capable of. It approaches slowly, fins rippling in the undulatory style of careful, controlled movement, and then when it is within range, the long feeding tentacles shoot out, faster than you can track, and a fish is gone, drawn toward the waiting beak in the center of the tentacle ring. The squid processes the fish quickly, its sharp beak biting off pieces and the radula, a tongue-like organ covered in tiny teeth, rasping the flesh into manageable pieces. It takes perhaps 30 seconds from capture to completion. Then the squid is still again, hovering in the dark water, its chromatophores cycling through patterns of light and dark that might be communication or might simply be the expression of a nervous system that is always busy, always processing. The bioluminescent light of the squid itself is visible when it chooses to activate it, a pattern of small, bright points along the sides of the mantle that serve as counter-illumination. When viewed from below against the faint ambient light of the surface, the bioluminescent pattern matches the background light closely enough to make the squid less visible as a silhouette. This is the most sophisticated use of bioluminescence in the ocean, a form of active camouflage that requires the squid to constantly adjust the intensity of its light organs to match the ambient brightness of the water above it. In a world that has no electricity, no manufactured light sources, no technology of any kind, the squid has invented something functionally equivalent to a cloaking device. The night passes, and the darkness is not oppressive but generous, full of light of its own making, full of movement and life that is different in character from the day's life but no less vital. You drift in the bioluminescent water and the lights drift with you and around you, and the night ocean holds you with the same warm patience that it held you during the day, because the ocean has no preference for one time of day over another, no commitment to the light or to the dark, it simply continues to be itself through both, as it has through every hour of every day since it first filled this basin with salt water and began its long and generous hosting of everything that swims within it. There are sounds in the night water that were not there during the day. Some of them are the sounds of predators becoming more active, the deeper, more regular vibrations of large bodies moving faster through the water, the pressure waves of hunting mosasaurs that arrive before the animals themselves. Some are the sounds of prey becoming more alert, the rapid, high-frequency pulses of fish in schools that have tightened against the darkness, the chemical signals of fear and warning that some species release into the water when threatened. And some are sounds that have no obvious explanation, low-frequency pulses that travel enormous distances through the water and whose origin is somewhere far away, perhaps another large marine reptile marking its territory, perhaps a geological event in the distant mountain building to the west, perhaps simply the settling of sediment on the sea floor as another millimeter of chalk accumulates on the patient, accumulating record below. You are not frightened by any of these sounds. They are the sounds of a world doing what it has always done, and the darkness does not change that, it simply changes the register in which the world expresses itself, moves the expression from the visual to the sonic and the tactile, from the bright and the colored to the felt and the heard. The water presses against you from all sides with the same mild, constant pressure it has always exerted. The temperature is slightly cooler than it was at midday, the surface layers have released some of their heat into the atmosphere during the evening hours, but it is still warm, still comfortable, still the temperature of a world that is generously warm across its entire surface, a world that has never had to deal with the cold that will eventually characterize so much of its own future. You close your eyes, which makes no difference in this darkness, except that it shifts the relationship between you and the sea from one of seeing to one of feeling, and you feel the water move around you, feel the long, slow pulse of the Cretaceous swells, feel the occasional turbulence of something larger passing at a distance, feel the ambient warmth of the bioluminescence as a quality of the water rather than as light. And in this state of sensory simplicity, this state of feeling rather than seeing, the ancient sea becomes something very close to what sleep becomes when it arrives, a warm holding, a gentle rocking, a darkness that is not threatening but encompassing, a letting go of the surface world and a sinking into something older and more patient and more reliably supportive. The night moves on. The stars in their ancient patterns will slowly above the surface far above you. The bioluminescence continues its quiet, beautiful emissions in every direction. And the creatures of the night ocean go about their business in the warm dark, hunting and hiding and drifting and feeding, in the same patterns they have followed every night since this sea first filled with water, and every night they will follow until the sea retreats for the last time and the land rises to fill the space the water leaves behind. Thank you for staying with this story into the night. If these ancient worlds bring you rest, subscribe and leave a like, it helps more than you know, and it means another story will be waiting the next time you need to sink below the surface of the day. Sleep well. There is one group of creatures in this sea that deserves a kind of particular attention, not because they are the largest or the most spectacular, but because they are the oldest. Older than the Mosasaurs, older than the Plesiosaurs, older even than most of the fish families that swim in this water alongside them. They are the sharks, and they have been in the ocean for so long that what it means to call something ancient begins to lose its descriptive power when applied to them. The first sharks appeared in the fossil record approximately 450 million years ago, more than 200 million years before the first dinosaur set foot on land, more than 400 million years before the first member of our own lineage walked upright on the African savanna. They have survived every mass extinction event in the history of the planet, the late Ordovician extinction that wiped out perhaps 85% of all species, the Devonian extinctions, the end Permian event that killed 96% of all marine species and came closer to ending complex animal life on Earth than any other catastrophe in the planet's history, the Triassic-Jurassic boundary event that cleared the ecological stage for the dinosaurs. Through all of these the sharks persisted, reduced in number and diversity during the worst of it but never eliminated, always rebuilding. The sharks in this Cretaceous sea are not the species you would find in the modern ocean. The great white shark does not yet exist, it will evolve much later, after the mass extinction at the end of this period, in a world that has been reset and rebuilt with new species filling the ecological roles vacated by the ones that died. The species here are adapted to the conditions of this particular sea, the warm, relatively shallow water, the particular mix of prey available, the competition from the mosasaurs and other large predators that share this corridor with them. You encounter the first one at night, when sharks tend to become more active in any era and any sea, and the encounter is characterized by the same quality that most shark encounters have when you meet them with respect and patience: it is quiet. The shark, perhaps 6 feet long, slender and elegant, its skin the same blue-gray counter-shaded pattern that has served the open ocean shark body plan for hundreds of millions of years, approaches from below, rising at a shallow angle from the deeper water toward the surface, apparently on a course that will carry it past you at a distance of perhaps 15 feet. You have stopped moving entirely. Your stillness is not the stillness of fear, or not only of fear, but of genuine appreciation for what is in front of you. A shark approaching in the dark is a thing of singular beauty: the slow, side-to-side sweep of the tail, each stroke smooth and regular, the pectoral fins held out in a gentle dihedral angle that gives the animal a lift in the water column that allows it to maintain depth without constant muscular effort, the first dorsal fin cutting the water above the mid-body in the classic profile that has appeared in every shark illustration since the first person thought to illustrate one. The Cretaceous shark carries the same body plan as its most distant ancestor, refined and adjusted over 400 million years of continuous use but recognizable from the beginning: a torpedo in the water, guided by one of the most sophisticated sensory systems that evolution has ever produced. The sensory system is worth dwelling on, because it is the thing that most distinguishes the shark from everything else in this water. The lateral line, shared with the bony fishes, detects pressure waves and vibrations. The ears, internal and barely visible from outside, detect low-frequency sounds that travel enormous distances through the water. The nostrils are designed less for breathing than for chemical detection, with the water passing continuously over elaborate arrays of olfactory tissue as the shark swims. A single molecule of blood in the water, diluted to something like 1 part per million, triggers the beginning of a search response. And then the final sense, the one unique to the sharks and their relatives the rays and skates, the electroreception system, an array of pores called the ampullae of Lorenzini distributed across the snout, each one connecting via a canal to a jelly-filled chamber that is exquisitely sensitive to electrical fields. Every living thing generates electrical fields. The contraction of every muscle, the firing of every nerve, the beating of every heart, all of these generate small but detectable electrical disturbances in the conductive medium of salt water. The shark reads these fields the way you might read a text. It can detect a fish buried in sand by the electrical activity of its heartbeat alone, can locate prey in complete darkness simply by following the gradient of increasing field strength toward its source. In a world without human technology, without any instrument more sensitive than the evolved sensory apparatus of living things, the shark's electroreceptive system represents a degree of perceptual precision that is almost impossible to fully appreciate. The shark passes at its predicted distance, neither adjusting its course toward you nor away from you, apparently reading you as neither interesting nor threatening. Its eye, which is on the side of the head and therefore looking at approximately a right angle to its direction of travel, catches the ambient bioluminescence for a moment and returns it as a flat, dark mirror, the tapetum lucidum behind the retina reflecting back the available light in the same way that cat eyes reflect in headlights. A biological enhancement of low-light vision that allows the shark to see in conditions that would leave a human effectively blind. After it has passed, you track it by the faint bioluminescent disturbance of its passage, the trail of disturbed dinoflagellates that marks the path of anything large moving through the night water. The trail persists for perhaps 30 seconds, fading as the disturbed organisms quiet themselves and the darkness reasserts itself. Then it is gone, and the water is dark again, and the shark is somewhere in that darkness continuing its ancient and essential work. There are multiple sharks in this sea. You can sense their presence rather than see it, a quality of alertness in the water that is hard to define but unmistakable to anyone who has spent time in the ocean and learned to read its mood. They are not in any way aggressive toward you. The idea of sharks as indiscriminate predators, hunting anything that moves, is a modern misconception driven by the dramatic and disproportionate coverage of the relatively rare occasions when a shark attacks a human. What sharks actually are, in reality and in this Cretaceous sea as much as in the modern ocean, is selective and intelligent hunters who investigate potential prey carefully before committing to an attack, and who very rarely find a large, slow, non-fish-shaped object to be a promising feeding opportunity. You are at peace with the sharks, and the sharks are at peace with you, and the night ocean contains you both in its warm and patient darkness, and this seems exactly right. This seems like the relationship between a visitor and the creatures of the ancient world that makes the most sense of any relationship available in a world this old, in a sea this permanent, in a night this long and warm and generously alive. The night deepens, or rather your sense of it deepens, which is the only way a night can deepen for anyone drifting in the middle of a sea with no clock and no calendar and no obligation to be anywhere at any particular time. The bioluminescence continues around you, a shifting and beautiful display that has been happening in this water every night for millions of years and will continue to happen in the successors of this sea long after this particular corridor of water has drained away into the geological past. The sharks move through the darkness on their ancient business, and the mosasaurs move through it on theirs, and the Ammonites drift in whatever direction the night current is carrying them, and the jellyfish pulse and the squid jet and the brittle stars move across the distant floor in their quick, fluid way, and the whole ocean breathes in the long, patient rhythm of its tides, which are the breath of the sea. The way breathing is the rhythm of an animal, regular, reliable, the most fundamental expression of aliveness that the ocean can offer. You breathe with it. Your own rhythm and its rhythm are not so different, not so far apart. Both are the rhythm of something alive in the darkness, moving air or water in and out, sustaining the chemistry of existence through the simple repeated action of taking in and letting go, taking in and letting go, taking in and letting go. The night holds you. The ancient sharks swim their ancient circles in the dark water around you. And the world is, for this moment, exactly and completely enough. Chalk is made of the dead. It is a soft, white sedimentary rock composed almost entirely of the compressed and compacted shells of tiny marine organisms, coccolithophores, primarily, which are single-celled algae that build themselves elaborate shields of calcium carbonate plates no larger than a few micrometers across. When a coccolithophore dies, its plates disperse into the water and begin to sink, so slowly that a single plate might take many months to travel from the sunlit surface where it was created to the seafloor where it will eventually come to rest. At any given moment in this sea, there are quadrillions of these plates in the water column between the surface and the floor, falling so slowly that they are effectively suspended, making the water slightly hazy in a way that no amount of clarity can entirely eliminate. The Cretaceous period takes its name from this chalk. The Latin creta means chalk, and the geological system was named in the 19th century for the chalk formations that are among the most visible and widespread deposits left behind when this sea and its equivalents around the world finally retreated. The white cliffs of Dover are Cretaceous chalk. The chalk downs of southern England are Cretaceous chalk. The limestone of the Great Plains of North America, which cattle graze above and farmers till without any particular awareness of what lies beneath their feet, is in many places Cretaceous chalk, the compressed record of this sea, this particular body of warm and biologically productive water, laid down layer by microscopic layer over the millions of years of the sea's existence. In the water around you now, the chalk is not yet chalk. It is alive. The coccolithophores are in the water in their billions, photosynthesizing in the sunlit surface layers, building their calcium carbonate plates with the same patient biochemistry that built the plates of every coccolithophore that has ever lived, dying and dispersing their plates into the water column with the same patient dispersal that has been filling the world's sea floors with calcium carbonate for hundreds of millions of years. The process is so gradual as to be essentially invisible. You could watch this water for 100 years and not perceive the chalk accumulating on the floor below, but it is continuous, and in its continuity it is producing something that will outlast every other thing that exists in this sea by a very considerable margin. The mosasaurs will be fossils. Their bones will be mineralized. The original bone mineral replaced atom by atom with the silicate or carbonate minerals of the surrounding rock, the shape of the bone preserved even as every atom of the original is exchanged for a new one, until what remains is a stone that was once a living thing and still carries its shape. The Ammonites will be fossils. Their shells are made of the same calcium carbonate as the chalk, and they will be preserved as either the original shell material or as molds in the surrounding rock, and they will be found by paleontologists with small brushes and a great deal of patience, and they will be held in museums and laboratories and collections, and they will tell stories about this sea to anyone willing to learn to read them. But the chalk does not become a fossil. The chalk simply becomes rock, becomes the geological layer itself, becomes part of the substrate of the continent, becomes the material that erodes into cliffs and is dug from quarries and is dissolved by slightly acidic rainwater into the ions that eventually reach the ocean and allow new coccolithophores to build new plates and continue the cycle. The chalk is not a record of individual lives the way a mosasaur skeleton is a record of an individual animal. It is the aggregate record of an entire community, of billions of generations of lives so small that the concept of individuality barely applies to them, compressed and lithified into a white and gentle rock that has no drama in it at all except the drama of scale. You think about this as you drift in the night water, feeling the slight chalky haze of the coccolithophore plates in the water against your skin, a texture so fine it is more sensation than perception, a softness that is the softness of things that are very, very small in enormous numbers. The chalk below you has been accumulating since before this sea was this sea, since before the basin filled with water, in fact, in the shallow marine environments that preceded this inland seaway, building upward in layers that together represent tens of millions of years of continuous biological activity. There is something profoundly calming about this scale. The individual human life, experienced from inside, tends to feel both very significant and very exposed, significant because it is the only perspective available to the person living it, exposed because it is bounded on both ends by events entirely outside its control, and because the world does not arrange itself around it with any particular care. But in the context of the chalk, in the context of billions of tiny lives accumulating over tens of millions of years into a geological layer that will persist for hundreds of millions of years more, the individual human life reveals itself as something quite different, a single plate among quadrillions, a brief glimmer of the photosynthetic reaction, a contribution to a record that is so large and so long that the contribution does not need to be large to be meaningful. The coccolithophore does not know it is contributing to the chalk. It has no knowledge, no sense of itself as a contributor to anything beyond its own photosynthesis and cell division. And yet the chalk exists. The contribution is real. The record is permanent, in the geological sense of permanent, which means 100 million years at minimum, which is more permanent than anything the largest and most ambitious human civilization has ever built. You are, in this moment, also a kind of coccolithophore, a brief, conscious, light-using organism in a large and ancient world, making its contribution to the record simply by being present and attentive, by existing in this water at this particular moment, by noticing the chalk and the sharks and the mosasaurs and the bioluminescence and the long warm breathing of the sea. The contribution of your attention will not be preserved in limestone, but it will be preserved in whatever you are, in whatever the act of witnessing does to the witness, which is always something, even when it is difficult to articulate what. The night ocean is around you, and the chalk is below you, and the coccolithophores are in the water with you in their billions, each one doing its small and essential work, each one contributing its small and essential contribution to a record that will outlast everything else in this world. And you drift among them, and you are grateful, in the way that the night makes gratitude possible, quietly, without expectation, without any particular object for the gratitude, simply open to it in the way that the water is open to the organisms that live within it. A bioluminescent medusa, a jellyfish, one of the larger ones, with a bell perhaps a foot across and trailing tentacles that extend 3 or 4 feet below it, pulses slowly past you in the night water. Each contraction of the bell produces a brief brightening of the bioluminescent light along its edge, a slow pulse of blue-green that fades between strokes. It is going somewhere, in the sense that it is moving in a consistent direction, though what that direction means to a jellyfish, whether there is anything in the jellyfish's experience that corresponds to the concept of destination, is a question that will probably not have an answer for as long as neuroscience persists in trying to understand consciousness only through the framework of vertebrate nervous systems. The jellyfish passes. The darkness fills the space it occupied. The chalk continues to accumulate below, in the way that the chalk has always accumulated and will continue to accumulate for a very long time to come. The sea is warm. The night is long. And somewhere below you in the soft dark sediment, the patient record is building, grain by grain, plate by plate, life by life, into a document that the future will eventually read with wonder and with something that, if the future has been honest with itself about what it owes to the past, might be called gratitude. The current has carried you, over the course of the night, closer to the eastern margin of the seaway, toward the shallower water that fringes the sea where it approaches the low coastal plains of the eastern landmass. Here the floor rises gradually from the depths of the mid-sea toward the pale sediment flats of the coast, and the character of the water changes in response to its relationship with the land. It is warmer here in the shallows, the sun having heated the thin layer of water over the pale bottom more effectively than it could heat the deep mid-sea. It is slightly murkier, the fine clays and silts of the coastal plains having been carried into the water by the rivers that drain from the eastern uplands. And it is noisier, or rather, it carries more information than the open sea, more biological and geological signals accumulated from a more complex and varied environment. You are no longer in deep water. You could stand here, if you wanted to. The water at the shallowest point of your current position is perhaps 10 feet deep, perhaps 15, shallow enough that the bottom is visible in the first light of the coming dawn as a pale, slightly rippled expanse of fine sand and mud overlaid by the seagrass-like plants that have colonized these coastal shallows. The plants of the Cretaceous sea margin are not quite seagrasses in the modern sense. The flowering plants that constitute modern seagrass beds had not yet diversified fully into the marine environment by the late Cretaceous, though some were beginning to establish themselves in just these kinds of shallow, warm coastal waters. What you see here is something similar in ecological role but different in botanical identity: submerged aquatic vegetation of various kinds, some ancestral to modern seagrasses and some belonging to lineages that will not survive the end of the period, rooted in the soft sediment and photosynthesizing in the full light that penetrates to this shallow floor. The shallows have their own community of creatures, distinct in important ways from the open water community you have been inhabiting. Here, the Ammonites are mostly absent, replaced by a different assemblage of mollusks adapted to shallow, warm, somewhat variable conditions. Gastropods, the single-shelled mollusks that include snails, move slowly across the bottom and up the stems of the aquatic vegetation, grazing on algae and detritus. Bivalves are present in considerable numbers, their shells visible as small bumps and ridges in the sediment where they have buried themselves with only the tips of their siphons exposed to the water. In the vegetation, small fish move with quick, darting precision, using the plant stems as cover from the larger fish that cruise along the edges of the vegetation beds. These small fish are not particularly different in their basic strategy from the small fish that inhabit modern seagrass beds and kelp forests. The vegetation provides structure, and structure provides refuge, and refuge allows a smaller and slower animal to exist in an environment that would otherwise be completely dominated by the faster and larger animals that hunt in the open. The vegetation is not an incidental feature of the shallow water environment. It is a foundation, a scaffold, an infrastructure that makes a great deal of other life possible. The dawn is coming. You can see it from here, a brightening of the eastern sky above the distant low line of the coast, a progression from the deep blue of the night through a gray and then a pale gold that expands slowly across the horizon and begins to fill the sky with the first colors of a Cretaceous morning. The water in the shallows catches this first light differently than the deep water caught the afternoon light. It comes in at a lower angle, hits the pale sandy bottom, and bounces back upward in a warm refraction that fills the water column from the bottom rather than the top, creating a lit from below quality that is characteristic of clear, shallow tropical water in the early morning. A turtle surfaces nearby. Not a sea turtle in the precise sense of any modern species, but something that belongs to the same broad evolutionary category, a large, dome-shelled reptile that has returned to the sea in the same way that the mosasaurs returned to the sea, abandoning the land life of its ancestors for the productive and vast resource of the ocean. Archelon, the largest turtle that ever lived, reaches 12 feet in length and weighs more than 2 tons, and is present in this sea. Whether the individual surfacing near you now is a giant or merely a large representative of its kind is unclear in the pre-dawn light. It surfaces slowly, with the deliberate surfacing of an animal that needs to breathe but is in no hurry to leave the water. The head lifts clear, the nostrils open, there is a breath, and then the head sinks slowly back and the dark shell dips below the surface in a long, unhurried submersion. The turtle represents something important about this sea that it is easy to overlook in the spectacle of the great predators. This sea is full of creatures that are living at a slower pace. Not slow in the pejorative sense, not sluggish or failing, but genuinely and productively slow, metabolisms geared to the kind of efficiency that allows long life and patient waiting and the kind of detailed environmental knowledge that accumulates over years and decades rather than weeks. The turtle is old. Turtles as a lineage are extraordinarily old, and individual turtles within a favorable environment can live for a very long time, longer than most vertebrates, longer than almost anything that is not either a tree or a particularly fortunate tortoise. There is wisdom, of a non-metaphorical kind, in the turtle's relationship with time. It has evolved to carry its life at a pace that is calibrated to the pace of the resources it depends on, the jellyfish and soft-bodied mollusks it feeds on, the warm shallow seas it inhabits, the beaches where it returns to nest. It does not hurry because there is no advantage in hurrying. The food will still be there. The beach will still be there. The sea is warm and the days are long and the resources are adequate, and the only relevant question is whether to surface for air now or in 10 minutes, and the answer is always the same, when the lungs require it and not before. The dawn light strengthens over the eastern shore, painting the shallow water in increasingly warm colors, gold first, then amber, then a bright clear morning light that makes the shallow sandy bottom glow. The fish in the vegetation beds become more active as the light improves, and the birds, for there are birds, primitive ones, toothed birds that are not yet the birds you know but that are clearly on the way to becoming them, come in from the coastal forests to work the margins of the seagrass, wading and probing and occasionally plunging their heads beneath the surface to catch the small fish that come within reach. The birds have a presence in this world that is easy to underestimate because they are small compared to the pterosaurs that share the air with them and small compared to the reptiles that dominate the water. But they are the future, in a way that none of the other creatures here are. They carry within their anatomy and their genetics the blueprint for what will become, after the extinction, the most diverse and widespread class of vertebrates on the planet. Right now, they are modest, a dozen species at most, small, mostly shore-dwelling, still retaining teeth in some lineages that their descendants will eventually lose. But they are here, and they are persistent, and they are demonstrating even now the combination of warm-bloodedness and flight and behavioral flexibility that will allow the birds to survive what nothing else in this sea will survive. But this is not a story about endings. The dawn light is warm on the water, and the turtle surfaces again for another quiet breath, and the birds work the tide line with their quick, light steps, and the mosasaur that has been hunting through the night is settling into the deeper water to rest through the warmth of the coming day. Everything is where it should be. Everything is doing what it has always done, what it will continue to do for millions of years to come, what it was shaped by time and selection to do in this particular world at this particular moment. The shallow water sparkles in the morning light. Small fish dart through the vegetation. A crab emerges from its hiding place in the sediment and moves sideways across the bottom with the specific sideways efficiency of crabs, which is a movement that has always seemed to be making a joke about directionality but is in fact precisely the most effective way to move on the particular type of long, multi-legged body that crabs have developed. The crab disappears under a shell fragment and is gone. The morning of the Cretaceous sea rises over the eastern margin, and the day unfolds again in all its green and golden and warm-watered abundance, and you are here to see it, which is the only thing required of any witness in any world. You have been in this sea long enough now that the creatures you have seen, the mosasaurs, the plesiosaurs, the sharks, the ammonites, have begun to feel familiar, to take on the character of acquaintances rather than strangers. And in the warmth of the morning light, drifting back out from the shallow margins into the open water of the mid-sea, you begin to notice the fish more carefully. Not the fish as a backdrop to the larger and more dramatic creatures, but the fish as the world, as the dominant form of vertebrate life in this ocean, the creatures around whom the whole ecology of this sea is organized, the prey that drives the behavior of every predator above them and the predator that drives the behavior of every animal below them. The Cretaceous Sea is full of fish families that will not survive into the modern world. Some of them are so different from anything living today that they require a moment of adjustment before the eye accepts what it is seeing as a fish at all. Others are familiar enough in their basic outline, the fusiform body, the paired fins, the tail, that you recognize them immediately, even if the specific proportions and features mark them as belonging to an earlier world. Xiphactinus is one of the Cretaceous fish that require the adjustment period. It is large, 12 to 17 feet long in the largest individuals, with a body plan that is somewhat similar to a modern tarpon or bonefish, the mouth upturned and the lower jaw protruding slightly, the whole anterior portion of the skull designed for one purpose, taking large prey. The teeth are impressive, conical and recurved, set in a mouth that can open to an angle capable of accommodating a fish half its own length. It is a pursuit predator, built for sustained high speed rather than ambush, and when it hunts it does so in a way that is close to the hunting of the modern tuna or billfish, long, fast chases through open water, the prey having little option but to outmaneuver or outspeed a predator that is several times its size. You see a group of them in the morning light, perhaps 4 individuals of various sizes traveling loosely together in the same direction, not schooling in the tight, coordinated way of the small fish, but maintaining a social proximity that suggests some form of aggregation behavior. The largest of them is genuinely impressive at close range. The flank is covered in scales that catch the morning light in individually distinct flashes, each scale slightly different in its angle and reflectivity from the ones around it. The tail beats with a slow, powerful rhythm. The mouth is held slightly open, water flowing continuously through the gills and the ram ventilation pattern of a fish that moves fast enough to force water through its own mouth without needing to actively pump it. There is a philosophical observation to be made about a fish as large as Xiphactinus occupying an ocean that also contains mosasaurs and plesiosaurs. The presence of the large marine reptiles does not make the fish irrelevant or dominated, quite the opposite. The fish of this sea represent the primary food resource that allows the reptiles to exist at all. A mosasaur that weighs 4,000 or 5,000 pounds requires an enormous amount of food to sustain its metabolism. That food, ultimately, comes from fish, either directly, when the mosasaur eats fish, or indirectly, when the mosasaur eats an ammonite that has been eating fish eggs and larvae, or when it eats a plesiosaur that has been eating fish, or in any of the dozens of other pathways by which the energy of this sea flows from the smallest organisms at the bottom of the food web up through the increasing sizes of the predatory hierarchy. The fish are the medium through which the sea's productivity is organized and transferred. They are the currency in which this economy is conducted. And the large fish, the Xiphactinus, the Semolichthes, the swordfish relatives that swim in the surface layers, are a significant portion of that currency, converting the energy of the smaller fish they eat into their own large bodies, which are then available to the top predators as a particularly concentrated and energy-rich resource. Smaller schools of fish are all around you as you drift through the morning water, and you watch them with new attention, not as a backdrop but as the point, as the thing around which everything else is organized. A school of fish that you estimate at perhaps 1,000 individuals is working a patch of plankton-rich water ahead of you, each individual moving its mouth in the rapid filtering motion of a planktivore, extracting zooplankton from the water as it swims through the richest part of the bloom. The school has a shape, roughly ovoid, with the denser core of individuals and a less dense periphery, and that shape is constantly changing, as the school slides around obstacles in its path and responds to the varied density of the plankton patch it is feeding on. What you notice, watching the school from a position just outside its periphery, is how it moves as though it has a single intention, a single awareness, even though it is made of 1,000 separate nervous systems, 1,000 separate sets of eyes, 1,000 separate and individual animals who are not communicating verbally or sharing information through any channel that human technology has yet been able to directly detect. The school moves as one because each individual is responding to the movements of its immediate neighbors, and those neighbors are responding to their neighbors, and the cascade of response propagates through the school faster than any individual decision-making process could account for. It is a form of distributed computation, a collective intelligence that emerges not from any central coordination but from the interaction of simple rules followed by every individual simultaneously. A mosasaur appears at the edge of the school, and the school's behavior changes instantaneously. The shape compresses inward from the mosasaur's side, the individuals near the predator accelerating away and those further in the school tightening in response to the pressure of their neighbors, until the school has become much denser and its shape has shifted, elongated away from the predator, presenting its least favorable dimension to the attack angle. The mosasaur charges into the school and the school splits, the two halves diverging and then reconverging as the predator passes through, the gap closing behind it as though it was never made. Several fish are gone, caught in the mosasaur's charge and swallowed or disabled, but the school as an entity has survived nearly intact, and within seconds it has reformed into its original shape and resumed its feeding. The mosasaur surfaces briefly, swallows, and returns to depth. The school feeds on. The morning light plays across the scales of 1,000 fish moving in their ancient, collective dance. And you watch it all with the quiet attention of someone who has been given a very long day in a very beautiful world, and who has learned, over the course of that day, to receive what is offered without requiring it to be more than what it is. The fish are what they are. They are not dramatic. They do not have names in the way that the large reptiles have acquired names. No child has a Simolactes lunchbox, no museum dedicates an entire wing to the schools of Cretaceous planktivores. But they are the foundation on which everything else rests, the living medium through which the energy of the sun, having arrived at the surface and been captured by the phytoplankton and passed to the zooplankton and from the zooplankton to the fish, is concentrated into the forms that the great predators of this sea require. Without the fish, there are no mosasaurs. Without the plankton, there are no fish. Without the sun, there is no plankton. Everything in this sea is a transformation of everything else, energy moving through living forms, taking shape as a mosasaur for a few decades and then dissolving back into the chemistry of the sea when the mosasaur dies, only to be taken up again by the microorganisms that process the organic material, converted back into phosphate and nitrate and the other basic currencies of ocean chemistry, and made available once more to the phytoplankton that will start the cycle again at its foundation. You are a part of this cycle, here in this water. Your body processes the chemistry of this sea through the water on your skin and in your lungs. You are, for this brief visit, genuinely part of the ancient world, not a spectator outside the glass but an element within it, as temporary and as real as any other element, as much a part of the flow of energy through the sea as the ammonite drifting 30 feet away. The morning advances. The school of fish moves on. The sea stretches in every direction under a sky that is clear and blue and warm, under a sun that is the same sun you have always known, burning at the center of the same solar system, warming the same planet, different only in the configuration of its land and water, in the creatures that inhabit it, in the fact that you are here to watch it now, which you are doing, right now, as the Cretaceous morning fills with light. There is something happening in this sea that you would not be able to see in the course of a single visit, something that plays out over thousands of years rather than hours or days, but whose effects are visible in the character of the water around you if you know how to read them. The sea is moving. Not in the obvious sense of waves and currents, but in the deeper sense. The sea level is gradually changing, has been gradually changing for millions of years, will continue gradually changing for millions of years to come. The Western Interior Seaway is not a fixed feature of the world, it is a dynamic system, responsive to global climate, to the rate of seafloor spreading in the distant oceans, to the amount of water locked in polar ice and released when warming periods melt it. At the moment you drift through it, the seaway is near its maximum extent. But even within the period of maximum flooding, the level fluctuates in response to shorter-term climate cycles, and these fluctuations leave records in the sediment. Periods when the sea was slightly deeper leave a different kind of chalk than periods when it was shallower, and those differences accumulate in the rock like the rings of a tree, a record of the small oscillations within the larger story of the sea's existence. The creatures of the sea live within these fluctuations without knowing they are fluctuations, which is to say, they adapt to the conditions of their lifetime without any sense of the longer pattern their lifetime sits within. A mosasaur born when the sea is at a particular level lives and hunts in that level, adjusts its behavior to the depth and temperature and productivity of the water as it exists in its particular decade, and dies having known no other ocean than the one it was born into. The sea changes around it imperceptibly, as the sea has always changed and will always change, and the mosasaur does not grieve what it has not noticed, and does not anticipate what it cannot foresee. There is a gentleness in this that you find yourself returning to. The animals of this ancient sea are not burdened by historical consciousness. They do not know that the sea will end. They do not carry the weight of the knowledge that everything beautiful is temporary, that everything productive and alive and warm will eventually be replaced by something different. They live in their present with a completeness that the human animal, which is cursed or blessed, depending on the day, with the capacity to simultaneously inhabit the past and the future, can never quite achieve. The human achievement is this: you can be here and know that you are here, can appreciate the beauty of this water because you understand something about what it is and where it comes from and where it will go. You carry the knowledge that makes appreciation possible. Without the knowledge of what an ammonite is, a drifting ammonite is merely a strange shell in warm water. With the knowledge, it becomes one of the most successful and beautiful organisms in the history of animal life, the product of 500 million years of continuous evolution, the representative of a lineage that has survived conditions that nearly ended everything, and that is a different kind of beauty, a beauty that requires context to be fully seen. And so you carry your knowledge here, into this ancient water, and you use it to see what is in front of you with the depth that knowledge allows. You see not just the mosasaur but the lineage of the mosasaur, the lizard ancestors, the progressive modifications, the tens of millions of years of selection for aquatic life. You see not just the ammonite but the lineage of the ammonite, the nautiloid ancestors, the Paleozoic diversification, the remarkable persistence through extinction event after extinction event until the final one. You see not just the chalk-making plankton falling through the water but the geological result of their falling, the rock that lies under fields in Kansas and cliffs in England, the record that connects this moment to your own. The sea around you is the same water, literally, in some cases, the same molecules cycling through the hydrological system, that you have encountered in every form water takes in your own world. The rain that falls on your roof has passed through the bodies of animals in this sea. The water in your glass has been vapor above these Cretaceous waves. The ice in your freezer contains atoms that were once warm seawater in this long and vanished corridor of ocean. Water is not destroyed. It cycles. And in its cycling it carries information, not the encoded information of DNA or the inscribed information of written language, but the physical information of having been shaped by every environment it has passed through, the information of temperature and salinity and chemistry that geologists and oceanographers read from ice cores and rock samples and the chemical signature of ancient sediments. You are made of water that has been here. That is not a metaphor. It is a statement of molecular fact. And being here now, drifting in the warm, ancient, greenlit water of a sea that existed before your species and that your species has spent generations discovering and naming and beginning to understand, is a return, of a kind. A return to a world that was already in you before you arrived. The sea continues its patient work of being warm and full and alive. The plankton continues its photosynthesis in the sunlit surface layers. The ammonites drift in their eternal spirals. The mosasaurs patrol their territories. The sharks make their ancient, silent circuits. The chalk falls, grain by grain, toward the floor below. And you drift in it, this warm ancient water, feeling the weight of the world settle gently into something quieter, something more accepting, something that is less about understanding and more about simply being in this water, being in this light, being in this moment that is as old and as new as any moment has ever been. The migration of the sea is happening around you at the pace of geology, which is a pace so slow it makes the concept of patience feel young and impatient. The sea will retreat. The land will rise. The creatures in this water will become fossils, and then they will become legend, and then they will become science, and through the science they will become comprehensible to minds that did not exist when they were alive. But that is a story for another time, a story that belongs to the surface world, to the world of chalk cliffs and museum halls and the patient work of paleontologists with small brushes and quieter attention than most. Here, below the surface of the sea that no longer exists, there is only this, water, and light, and life, and time. And you, drifting through it, awake to everything it offers, which is everything. The midday sun has climbed to its highest point above the surface, and its light descends through the water in the most nearly vertical shafts of the day, direct and clear and warm, illuminating the water column with a quality of light that has no shadows in it, no edges, no corners, only the pervasive, all-surrounding warmth of a world that is receiving full attention from the star at the center of its system. In this full noon light, the sea is at its most transparent, the visibility at its greatest extent, and the world visible to you in every direction seems to extend to a distance that implies the vastness of this sea, the 2,000 miles from its northern to its southern end, the hundreds of miles of its width, the billions of years of the planet's history that produced the conditions for its existence. You have been in this sea for a long time now, by human standards. You have seen it through its morning, through its afternoon, through its evening and its night and its dawn and back into its morning again. You know its rhythms now in the way that you know the rhythms of a place you have spent time in, with the knowledge that is not memorized but absorbed, that sits in the body rather than the mind, that makes you move differently in a space because you have internalized its qualities without having to consciously recall them. The sea has become familiar to you. The warm water is no longer a surprise. The shapes of the creatures are no longer strange. You move through this world with the ease of a visitor who has been here long enough to stop being a visitor and start simply being here. There are moments in this sea, as there are moments in any large body of water, when the activity of the world seems to pause. Not because the world has actually stopped, the plankton are still photosynthesizing, the ammonites are still drifting, the chalk is still falling toward the floor, but because the eye and the ear and the sense that is neither exactly sight nor sound but something in between, the sense that perceives the presence of things before they can be precisely located, all of these are reporting a relative quiet, a stillness in the quality of the water that suggests the middle of the day has arrived. And with it the particular lull that comes between the morning feeding rush and the afternoon activity that will build toward the evening. You are in the open water, not too deep, in the comfortable mid-column position that has been your home base through this long visit. The surface is visible above you as the familiar shimmering ceiling, brighter now at midday than it was at any other point in the day. Below you, the water deepens through green to blue to a gentle darkness that is not ominous but simply deep, simply the natural result of light being unable to penetrate to any depth without cost. In this moment of relative quiet, you become aware of something that the activity of the sea has been drowning out during the busier hours, the sound of the sea itself, distinct from the sounds of the creatures in it. The sound of water moving through water, currents meeting and separating, the long pressure waves of the Cretaceous tidal system arriving from distances that span a continent, the minute crackling and settling sounds of the chalk sediment on the floor below. These sounds are low and pervasive, in the frequency range below clear hearing but above the threshold of physical feeling. You receive them through the tissues of your body rather than through your ears, as vibrations rather than sounds, and the effect is something like being inside music too large to hear from the outside. Water transmits sound with extraordinary efficiency. A sound produced in the shallows at one end of this sea will, at sufficient amplitude and low enough frequency, travel to the other end without significant loss, 2,000 miles in less than 20 minutes, which is faster than any animal alive in this period can move and faster than any information can travel through the biological systems of this world except through the medium of the water itself. The large marine reptiles may use this property of the medium, may communicate across distances that seem impossible by the standards of land-dwelling animals, may maintain some form of contact with conspecifics hundreds of miles away through signals too low in frequency for you to detect as sound but too regular and patterned to be purely geological. The question of what the animals of this sea know about the world beyond their immediate vicinity is one that the fossil record cannot answer. The bones tell you the size and shape of the animal and something about its diet and something about its injuries and causes of death, but they tell you nothing about the inside of the world, what it was like to be a mosasaur, what the sea looked like from behind those large, water-adapted eyes, what information arrived through the pressure sensors along the jaw, what the temperature of the water felt like against the scales. The experience of being these animals is as completely inaccessible as any experience can be, and that inaccessibility is one of the things that gives the ancient world its particular quality of mystery. But you can attend to what is available. The shape of the body tells you something about the life the body was shaped for. The long neck of the elasmosaur evolved for reaching into fish schools without alarming them with a large approaching body, which tells you something about the patience required for that hunting strategy and the quality of attention the animal must have maintained in the water. The large eyes of the mosasaur tell you something about the quality of darkness in this sea at night and the opportunities that darkness opened for a predator equipped to see in it. The extraordinary chemical sensitivity of the shark's nose tells you something about how saturated with information the water of this sea was, how many messages it carried simultaneously through the medium of dissolved organic molecules, how much of the history of every animal's passage remained encoded in the water for some time after the animal had gone. The sea is a memory medium. Every living thing that passes through it leaves a trace, chemical, thermal, mechanical, and every other living thing that passes through the same water afterward reads some part of that trace, extracting information from it the way a reader extracts information from the marks on a page. The ammonite ahead of you is reading the trace of the zooplankton that has been here before it. The mosasaur is reading the trace of the fish school it will hunt this afternoon. The shark is reading the trace of everything that has passed within a radius of several miles in the last hour. The sea is full of writing, and everything in it is reading. You drift in this writing and you read what you can of it, which is a very small fraction of the total. You lack the chemical sensitivity of the shark, the pressure sensitivity of the fish's lateral line, the electrical sensitivity of the sharks and rays. What you have is the eye, and through the eye you read the light and color and movement of a world that has been expressing itself in these ways for millions of years before your arrival and will continue to do so for millions of years after your departure. The quiet of midday deepens around you. Above, a pterosaur passes over the sea surface, and its shadow arrives briefly in the water below, a long, tapering shadow moving at the speed of the animal that casts it, passing over you and continuing to the south, gone in a few seconds. You look up toward the surface and can just barely make out the shape of the animal itself, a silhouette against the bright surface light, its wings sweeping back in the shallow glide of an animal that has found the thermal current it was looking for and is now riding it with the efficiency of something that has been doing this for its entire life. There is a stillness in the middle of the day that is different from the stillness of the night. The night's stillness is the stillness of the world withdrawing into itself, pulling back from the visible into the private. The midday stillness is more like the stillness of a pause in a conversation, a moment of gathering, of processing, of taking in what has already been said before proceeding with what comes next. The sea in the middle of the day is thinking, in whatever way a sea thinks, which is to say, in the aggregate behavior of all its organisms, in the collective chemical and mechanical conversation that is always ongoing in the water. You have been thinking, too. Not in the deliberate, goal-directed way that the word usually implies, but in the slow and associative way that the mind thinks when it is allowed to drift without agenda, one thought leading to another not by logical connection but by resemblance or resonance or the simple fact of temporal proximity. The way the Ammonite makes you think of the Nautilus makes you think of the ocean floor, makes you think of the chalk, makes you think of the cliffs of Dover, makes you think of the English Channel. Where those cliffs are visible from the French coast on a clear day, and how the chalk of those cliffs is the chalk of this sea, compacted and lithified and raised by the slow geology of plate movement into something you can stand on and look at and touch with your hand. The chalk you would touch with your hand on those white cliffs is the chalk that has been falling through the water around you for the entire time you have been here. It connects you to this world in a way that is not metaphorical, in a way that is as literal and physical as connections get. The rock under your feet in parts of the world you have walked through is the floor of this sea. The ground is the sea. The solid world is the ancient water world. There is not a divide between then and now, not really, there is only the continuous transformation of matter through forms that pass and change and pass again. The sea breathes around you in its long, warm rhythm. The midday quiet holds. The light falls through the water from its highest angle of the day and returns from the sea floor in a warmth that fills the water column from below. You are in the middle of this. In the middle of the light, in the middle of the water, in the middle of a moment that is both 85 million years ago and right now, because you are here and you are aware of being here, and awareness makes the moment present regardless of the calendar that surrounds it. This is the gift that this ancient sea offers to the attentive visitor, the gift of presence. Not the forced, performative presence of mindfulness practice, but the natural, effortless presence that comes from being in a place so different from your ordinary world that your ordinary mental habits have been temporarily suspended, your ordinary concerns left behind at the surface, your ordinary sense of what matters replaced by the simple, sufficient fact of being in warm water in the middle of an ancient afternoon, surrounded by creatures whose beauty you have no agenda for and whose existence requires nothing from you except that you notice it. You notice it. You have been noticing it since you arrived. And the noticing has been a kind of rest, a rest from the labor of ordinary consciousness, which is always building and assessing and anticipating, into the easier and more fundamental activity of simple attention. The sea provides the content. You provide only the attention. And the attention, applied gently and without expectation to the warm and ancient world around you, produces a quality of rest that is not the rest of unconsciousness but the rest of very deep, very present, very simple wakefulness, the rest that comes just before sleep, when the mind has softened enough to stop producing its own content and has started simply receiving whatever the world offers, which is, if you are in the right place and at the right time, everything. The afternoon of your second day in this sea is longer and more golden than the first. The light comes at its lower afternoon angle again, as it did yesterday, but today you recognize it. You know what the quality of this particular light means, know that it means the warmth of the day is beginning its long retreat toward the coolness of the night, know that the animals of the sea are making their afternoon adjustments, the nocturnal ones waking gradually from the torpor of the warm day, the diurnal ones settling into the reduced activity of the later afternoon before they find their resting positions for the night. You have not been counting the hours. Time in this sea is measured by the quality of the light and the behavior of the creatures, and both are telling you the same thing: the afternoon has begun. The sea around you is still warm, still lit, still full. But the character of the fullness has shifted slightly, as it always does in the afternoon of a good day, from the fresh, alert fullness of the morning to something richer and more settled, the fullness of a world that has been doing what it does for another full day and is moving toward the completion of that day with the unhurried efficiency of deep experience. You find yourself drifting toward the surface. Not urgently, not for any particular reason, but in the natural way of a drifter whose buoyancy is slightly positive, who is no longer actively fighting against the tendency to rise. The surface comes closer slowly, the water brightening above you, the individual waves becoming more distinct, the shimmer of light resolving from a general ceiling into a pattern of specific, moving lenses, and then you are through it, blinking in the direct afternoon sunlight, feeling the warmth of the air on your face for the first time since you surfaced last evening. The surface of the sea, seen from within it, is always a surprise after time spent below. The expanse of the open water is larger from the surface. You can see to the horizon, which is a clean and unbroken line where the blue of the sea meets the blue of the sky, and the scale of what you are floating in becomes apparent in a way that it never quite is from below, where the water limits your vision to the range of the eye's penetration through the medium. From up here, from this flat and dazzling surface, the sea seems limitless. A mosasaur surfaces 50 yards away, and you watch it breathe with the familiarity of someone who has been watching mosasaurs breathe for 2 days. The exhalation, the inhalation, the slow submersion, these are now ordinary to you, in the way that the behaviors of animals become ordinary when you have spent enough time in their world to start taking them for granted. This is a good kind of ordinary, not the ordinary of boredom, but the ordinary of being at home in a place, of having moved past the stage of constant novelty into the stage of comfortable familiarity. The afternoon light on the surface of the Cretaceous Sea is extraordinary. The water is flat today, there has been no wind, and the swells from the north, which were gentle yesterday, have diminished further today, so that the surface is almost a mirror in places, with only the long, barely perceptible breathing of the oceanic swell to interrupt the reflection of the sky. In this stillness, the sea reflects the sky back with unusual fidelity. You can see the shapes of the high clouds, perfectly inverted, in the blue water around you. You are floating between two skies. Several pterosaurs are visible, working the surface feeding zone above a school of fish that has concentrated at the surface to feed on a particularly dense aggregation of zooplankton in the afternoon light. The pterosaurs work in the distinctive style of the larger species, long, shallow glides from height, the beak extended and skimming just above the surface, the eyes fixed on the water below, and then the brief, precise dipping of the beak to catch a fish near the surface, followed by the laborious flapping climb back to soaring altitude. Each attempt takes perhaps 30 seconds from descent to resumed glide. The success rate you observe is perhaps 1 in 4, which means that each pterosaur, in an afternoon's work, makes dozens of attempts, catches perhaps a dozen fish, and expends an enormous amount of energy in the process. The pterosaurs are not failing at what they are doing. 1 in 4 is a reasonable success rate for a hunting animal, similar to the success rate of many modern raptors, which also hunt by visual detection and aerial pursuit and which face the same fundamental challenge of catching a fast, aware prey animal in the brief window of an attack. What looks like failure from the outside is simply the cost of being a large hunter in a world full of prey that has evolved to avoid being caught. You watch the pterosaurs for a long time. Their flight is something you never quite get used to, even now. The wingspan of the largest individuals is extraordinary, 30 feet, perhaps more, a single continuous surface of membrane stretched between enormously elongated finger bones and the body and the hind leg, controlled by a musculature that must be both incredibly powerful and incredibly precise, capable of generating the lift required to keep this large body airborne and of making the fine adjustments in wing shape that allow the glide to be extended, the turn to be banked at precisely the right angle, the descent to be controlled so that the beak arrives at the surface at exactly the right speed and angle. The pterosaurs are not birds. They are not the ancestors of birds, which evolved independently from a different group of dinosaurs. They are a completely separate solution to the problem of powered flight, a solution arrived at through a different evolutionary pathway and resulting in a different but equally elegant design. When the asteroid arrives, the pterosaurs will be gone, every species of them, from the largest to the smallest, from the long-crested to the toothless to the piscivorous to the filter-feeding forms. They will be represented only in stone, in the impressions of hollow bones in Cretaceous sediment, in the outline of wing membranes preserved by exceptional conditions in Jurassic lagoons, in the work of the people who will spend their lives trying to understand what it meant to be something that flew over an ocean that no longer exists. But the asteroid has not arrived. The sky is clear and the afternoon is warm and the pterosaurs are working the surface in their ancient and effortful way, and the mosasaurs are below you in the water doing their ancient and patient work, and the sea is alive from surface to floor with the particular aliveness of a world that is in its prime, not declining, not recently devastated and rebuilding, but full and steady and in the comfortable midpoint of its long existence. The afternoon continues in its golden, unhurried way. The sun descends. The light warms. The sea sparkles. You float on the surface of a world that has never heard of you, in an ocean that no longer exists except in stone and in the understanding of people who have spent their lives learning to read what stone has to say about water. And in this floating, in this warm and golden afternoon on the surface of the ancient sea, something that has been gently loosening in you since you arrived here completes its loosening, and you feel yourself relax into the water in a way that goes deeper than the muscles, deeper than the attention, all the way down to whatever it is that generates the background hum of ordinary life, the low-frequency tension that most people maintain simply as a consequence of being a conscious creature in a complex world. That tension is absent here. Or if it is present, it has been reduced to something so faint that the warm water around you covers it the way a blanket covers a cold draft, not eliminating it but making it irrelevant. You are in the water. The water is warm. The afternoon is long. The world is beautiful and old and in no particular hurry, and neither are you, and neither, right now, is anything else. The sea holds you. It has been holding you since you arrived, and it will continue to hold you for as long as you need to be held. That is what the sea does, it holds. It held the first life that ever lived in it, 3.5 billion years ago. It held the first fish. It held the first thing with a backbone that emerged from it onto land. It held the ancestors of every creature alive in it now, including the ancestors of the mosasaurs before they ever entered the water, when they were still lizards on the banks of the warm Cretaceous shore. The sea holds. That is its most fundamental property, more fundamental even than its wetness or its saltiness or its depth. It holds. And in the long and golden afternoon, it holds you, too. You sink below the surface one more time as the evening of your second day approaches, and the descent feels different from the first descent, from the excited, observant, slightly alert descent of a new arrival in an unknown world. This descent is the descent of someone returning. The water receives you with the familiar warmth. The green light surrounds you with the familiar embrace. The world below the surface reassembles itself around you with the reassurance of a known landscape. The evening light is doing its amber work on the upper layers of the water, and you drift in it with your eyes half open, watching the way the longer wavelength light of late afternoon transforms the color of the sea from green toward gold toward something that does not have a precise name in any language designed by creatures who have never spent a day and a night and another day in the water of a vanished sea. The creatures around you are settling into their evening patterns. The mosasaur you have been seeing throughout the day makes one more pass at a comfortable distance, its form moving through the golden water with the same deliberate, rhythmic grace it has always shown. It is going somewhere specific, you can tell this from the directedness of its movement, the way it maintains its heading instead of wandering, and you let it go without trying to follow, because there is no need to follow, because the mosasaur is always going somewhere specific and always has been, and the specific destination is not as important as the quality of the going. The Ammonites are drifting in the current that has picked up slightly in the early evening, and you drift with them. There is something pleasant about drifting in the same current as the Ammonites, a sense of being part of the same system, subject to the same forces, moving through the same water in the same direction at roughly the same speed. The Ammonite next to you does not acknowledge your presence any more than the current acknowledges the Ammonite's presence, but you acknowledge theirs, and that is sufficient, because acknowledgement does not require reciprocity to be real. The plesiosaur you saw yesterday appears again in the middle distance, or a plesiosaur, you cannot be certain it is the same individual, though the specific pattern of markings on the neck seems familiar, seems to have been retained in some corner of your visual memory from yesterday's encounter. It moves through the evening water with the same steady, four-flippered flight you remember, the long neck extended slightly ahead of the body, the small head making its quick, precise turns as it searches the water ahead. It is hunting, but gently. The evening hunt has a different quality than the morning hunt, the predator slightly tired from a full day's activity, less explosive in its movements but no less effective for it. You watch it pass through the water ahead of you, growing smaller as it moves away, until the distance and the evening haze absorb it and it is gone. The space where it was is just water again. The water has no memory of what passed through it, maintains no record of the plesiosaur's passing except in the very brief and rapidly dissipating mechanical signature of the pressure waves from its flippers, which have reached you and passed through you and continued on their way and are now too diffused to detect. The sea, in this way, is always new. Every moment is fresh water, or the same water freshly configured, freshly arranged. Whatever was here a moment ago is already somewhere else, and what is here now has just arrived from somewhere else, and what will be here in a moment is already on its way from somewhere else. The sea is made entirely of arrivals and departures, at every scale from the molecular to the oceanic, and nothing that is here is truly here in the sense of being fixed and permanent and reliably present. Everything is passing. Everything is in transit. And yet the sea is not experienced as transit. It is experienced as presence, as the warm, continuous, patient presence of water and light and life that has been the background of this long visit. The transit is the mechanism, the presence is the experience, and the distinction between them is perhaps one of the more important distinctions available to a mind trying to understand how it is that a world made entirely of impermanent things can feel, from inside it, so permanent, so established, so unquestionably here. The answer, you think, is accumulation. Individual moments of water and light pass through this space and are replaced by new moments, but the accumulation of those moments creates something that is more than any individual moment, creates the quality of the sea, which is constant even as the sea itself is constantly changing. The Mosasaur is different from the Mosasaur of an hour ago in the sense that its molecules have been continuously replaced and its position has changed and its state of hunger or satiety has shifted, but it is the same Mosasaur in the sense that it carries the same pattern, the same organization of matter that makes it recognizably and consistently itself. And the sea is the same sea in the same way, the same organization, the same pattern, renewed continuously in new matter. You are descending still, gradually, through the lower layers of the photic zone into the cooler blue of the depths. The bottom is visible below you, the pale chalk of the sea floor lit dimly from above, its gentle topography of mounds and channels visible in the last light that reaches this depth. You hover there for a while, just above the floor, watching the slow animals of the benthic community doing their patient work. The crinoids wave their arms. A brittle star crosses your field of view. A flatfish, briefly disturbed by your presence, settles back into its near-perfect camouflage on the pale sediment. The floor of this sea is accumulating its record, as it always is, as it always will be until the sea retreats and the record becomes stone. Every organism that has lived in this water has contributed to that record in some way, directly, through the preservation of its hard parts, or indirectly, through the contribution of its body to the organic chemistry of the sediment. The record does not distinguish between the large and the small, the predator and the prey. All are recorded equally, in the universal currency of carbon and calcium and silica and iron. You are part of the record now, in the sense that you have been here and your presence has been real, even if it leaves no physical trace. You have been in this water. You have breathed the air above this water. You have watched the Mosasaur and the Plesiosaur and the Ammonites and the sharks and the bioluminescent jellyfish and the brittle stars and the flatfish on the pale chalk floor. You have witnessed a world that no longer exists except in its geological record and in the minds of the people who have learned to read that record. And the witnessing, even without a physical record, is real, is a form of the record continuing to function, continuing to communicate across the 85 million years between the deposition of the chalk and the reading of it. The evening deepens around you. The light fades from the water above in the same gradual way it faded yesterday evening, and the same bioluminescence begins its slow brightening in response, and the same shift from the visual world to the felt world begins its patient transformation of the sea from a place you see to a place you inhabit from the inside. You are very comfortable now. The warmth of the water is the warmth of a world adjusted to your needs before you arrived, as though the sea has always been this temperature and always will be, and the temperature it has always been and always will be is precisely and exactly the temperature that allows your body to relax completely, to release every held tension, to settle into the water in the way that tired things settle into supportive surfaces, finding in the support the permission to stop holding themselves up and simply be held. The sea holds you. It has always held you. It held the water that is in you before you were born, in the oceans and the rivers and the clouds that cycled it through the world and eventually through the biological processes that assembled you. You are ancient water, briefly organized into the shape of a person, floating in ancient water, in an ancient sea, in an ancient world that is exactly as it should be and has always been exactly as it should be and will always be exactly as it should be, which is to say, here, warm, alive, and in motion. If you are still drifting, still in the warm water of this ancient sea, let yourself go the rest of the way. Subscribe so the next story is ready when you wake. Sleep well. Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one. The sea is around you. The sea is always around you. Not this sea, not exactly, not the warm and vanished interior sea of the Cretaceous, not the water that once covered the heart of the continent and held mosasaurs and plesiosaurs and ammonites and bioluminescent jellyfish in its warm, green, ancient embrace. But some sea. The sea of your own depths, the warm and patient interior of your own resting body, the chemistry of salt and water that makes you continuous with every ocean that has ever existed. The water is warm. The light is fading. There is nothing more to see tonight, or rather, there is always more to see, but you have seen enough, and seeing enough is a gift that not everyone accepts with the grace it deserves. You have accepted it. You have been in this ancient water for a long time now, and you have seen what it offered, and what it offered was enough, more than enough, in the way that the ocean is always more than enough, exceeding every expectation of what it was going to be. Let the water take you down now. Not the Cretaceous water specifically, you are leaving that sea, rising slowly toward your own surface, toward the warmth of your own bed, toward the familiar territory of your own body settling into rest. But let the quality of the water come with you. Let the warmth come. Let the patient, ancient, unhurried quality of the sea, the quality that knows it has been here for hundreds of millions of years and expects to be here for hundreds of millions more, let that quality settle into the tissues of your body the way the temperature of a warm bath settles, gradually, all the way in. Your breathing is slow. It was already slow, and now it is slower, the long, easy breathing of a body that is remembering how to rest, that is finding in the memory of the ancient sea a permission to release the day, to let it go, to allow it to become the past that it is in the process of becoming with every second that passes. The Mosasaur is somewhere in the deep water below the surface of sleep, moving through the warm dark in its patient circles. The Ammonites are drifting in the current that flows through the place where sleep meets dreaming. The sharks are making their ancient rounds in water that is older than any of the fears you have brought to this night, older than the anxieties that seem so present and so urgent in the surface world and that look so small and so temporary from here, from this depth, from this ancient perspective. You are in the water. The water is warm. The light is the bioluminescent light of the deep night sea, soft and blue-green and present from every direction at once, a light that illuminates without glaring, that shows you what is near without blinding you to what is distant. In this light, the world is gentle. In this light, the world asks nothing of you. In this light, you are simply a body in warm water, breathing slowly, releasing the day, sinking into the patient and generous darkness of deep sleep. The sea is below you and above you and on every side. It is the temperature of your own body's warmth at rest. It makes the sound of the tide, a long, deep, perfectly regular sound that you feel more than hear, that arrives not through your ears but through your chest, through the whole surface of your skin, through the particular biological receptors that respond to low-frequency vibration by sending a signal along pathways older than language, older than consciousness, pathways that terminate in the part of the brain that says, "This is safe. This is warm, this is held, you can let go now. Let go now. The sea has you. The ancient water has you. The warm and patient and ageless ocean has you in its warm and patient and ageless embrace, and you are safe here, and you are held here, and the only thing that is asked of you is the one thing that this sea has always been offering you since you first arrived and that you are, at last, fully ready to accept. Rest. Be still. Let the warm water do what warm water does, which is to hold everything that is given to it, gently and without judgment, for as long as it is needed. The chalk is falling through the water above the ancient seafloor, as it has always been falling, as it will always be falling, one tiny plate at a time, building the long and patient record of this world one almost invisible layer at a time. The Mosasaur breathes at the surface and submerges and breathes and submerges in the long, unhurried rhythm of an animal that has never had to hurry. The Ammonites drift on currents that carry them slowly from their hatching grounds to their feeding grounds to the gentle ending that awaits all things. And you drift, too. Your breath is very slow now, and very even, and the world of the surface, the world of days and plans and lists and clocks, is very far above you, very quiet, very small from this depth. From this depth, the only sounds are the sounds of the sea, and the sea is patient, and the sea is warm, and the sea is older than anything that has ever troubled you, and it is not troubled, and in its warmth and its patience and its ancientness, you are not troubled either. Sleep is very close now. It is as close as the water that surrounds you. It is as close as the next breath and then the breath after that, and the silence between them. The ancient sea closes gently over you. Sleep well. If you liked this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic, feel free to leave it in the comments.